Hey guys, tonight we're slipping back into a time where powdered wigs were the height of fashion, tea was a political statement, and your average Tuesday could end in a musket fight. That's right, we're diving into the entire American Revolution. You're not just reading about it tonight, you're living it. Candlelight flickers, wooden floors creak beneath your boots. There's the faint scent of horses and ink and tension in the air. The streets of Boston twist ahead of you, thick with protest, rumors, and the sharp tang of colonial defiance. And fair warning, you probably won't survive this. I mean, statistically, between smallpox, starvation, and redcoats with bayonets, the odds are not in your favor. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments, where in the world are you listening from and what time is it right now? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It's 1763, and Boston hums with the quiet aftershock of war. You walk down a narrow lane, boots kicking up dust. The 7 Years' War has just ended, and Britain, now bloated with new territories, needs cash. Enter the Sugar Act, and the Stamp Act, and the Townshend Acts. And you, unfortunately, are right in the middle of this financial love letter to Parliament. You duck into a tavern, the Green Dragon maybe, and the buzz of political gossip wraps around you like pipe smoke. Angry murmurs about taxation without representation. Someone slams their mug down. A printer's apprentice boasts about joining a new secret club, something with a catchy name. Ah yes, the Sons of Liberty. You squint at the handbills scattered across the table, skulls printed over tax stamps, slogans dripping with sarcasm. This is protest, 18th century style. Outside, customs officers are being tarred and feathered. You wince. It's brutal stuff, but there's also a bit of twisted theater to it. Colonial defiance is getting creative. Boycotts ripple through shops. Women spin homespun cloth in defiance of British imports, and even church sermons double as political manifestos. You stroll past the customs house just in time to hear a snowball thwack a British sentry's shoulder. And it all unravels from there. Snowballs turn to rocks, yelling turns to shoving, then pop, a musket shot. You flinch, more follow. When the smoke clears, 5 colonists lie still. Crispus Attucks, a dock worker of African and native descent among them. The Boston Massacre, they'll call it. Paul Revere will engrave it with artistic flair, all exaggerated angles, and stoic martyrs. Historians still argue whether the soldiers were provoked or panicked, but the image sticks. Redcoats firing on civilians, you can't unsee it, and neither can the rest of Boston. Time passes, but the fuse burns. Parliament, in a display of genius-level provocation, grants the British East India Company a monopoly on tea. That's right, cheap tea, which somehow makes everyone furious. You smirk. Imagine fighting a war over beverage pricing. And yet, here you are, cloaked and quiet, slipping onto a ship in Boston Harbor with dozens of others. It's December 16th, 1773. You're dressed like a Mohawk. Badly. You tip over crates and hear the splash of tea hitting cold water. The harbor smells faintly floral afterward, like a rebellious afternoon tea. The British are not amused. In retaliation, they slap down the coercive acts, though the colonies promptly rebrand them intolerable. You've got to admire the PR game. Boston's port is closed and royal officials gain sweeping power. Local assemblies dissolved. Your neighbors livid. So 13 colonies hold hands across geography and gripes and summon the First Continental Congress. You tag along to Philadelphia, where delegates, merchants, farmers, lawyers talk revolution in hushed tones, careful not to say it outright. They're not ready to break away. Not yet. But they are ready to organize, to defy, to resist. Meanwhile, in the streets, militias begin to drill. You shoulder a musket, it's heavier than it looks, and join a growing crowd of part-time farmers, full-time idealists. The British notice, they send more troops. You feel the tension thickening like soup left too long on the fire. Then comes April 1775. British General Gage, in a bold attempt to nip rebellion in the bud, sends troops to seize weapons in Concord. But colonials are faster. You mount a horse and ride into history. Paul Revere wasn't alone. William Dawes and Samuel Prescott also galloped through the dark, whispering the warning, the British are coming. Or maybe not exactly that, but close enough. By morning, Lexington Green shivers under gray light. You stand in formation, hands trembling on your weapon. Someone coughs. The British commander orders you to disperse. You hesitate. And then, again, a shot. Who fired first? No one knows. Still debated, still unresolved. But the result is irreversible. 8. Colonists fall. You run, you reload. You fight again at Concord's North Bridge, and this time it's the Redcoats who retreat, chased back to Boston by farmers with pitchforks, housewives with rifles, and the ghosts of a revolution now fully awake. The American Revolution has begun, and you're in it. Boots muddy, musket hot, heart pounding like a drum. You're still catching your breath from the running fight back to Boston when you hear the first whispers. Someone rode through the night to spread the news. But it wasn't just one rider, and it wasn't just Paul Revere, despite what that famous poem claims. No offense to Longfellow, but history's more crowded than he lets on. You rewind the scene. It's the night of April 18th, 1775. A full moon hangs low, spilling silver light across the Massachusetts countryside. You adjust the saddle, your horse twitching nervously beneath you. You've been given a message. British troops are marching toward Concord to seize weapons, and colonial leaders John Hancock and Samuel Adams are possible targets. You nudge your horse into motion. Paul Revere takes the northern route. William does the southern. You? Maybe you're riding as Samuel Prescott, a local doctor who just happened to be in the right tavern at the right time. Or the wrong time, depending on your need for sleep. Either way, you gallop through fields and pastures, dodging British patrols, waking sleepy farmers shouting the warning again and again. The regulars are out. Yes, regulars, not British, because technically you are British, too. That little quirk always gets glossed over. You pass towns where lanterns flicker into life. Church bells clang, muskets are loaded, minutemen form lines. You've never seen a colony wake up so fast. Somewhere in the distance, the slow churn of war begins. Revere gets captured. Dawes is thrown from his horse, but Prescott makes it through, to Concord, the only one to complete the warning ride. A quirky historical footnote? Maybe. But without him, that morning's showdown might have been even bloodier. At dawn, the Redcoats reach Concord. You're standing near the North Bridge when things spiral again. This time it's the colonists who fire back with certainty. You can smell black powder and hear the sharp echo of musket fire rolling off the riverbanks. The British, stunned and bloodied, begin their retreat. What follows is a grueling, chaotic chase back toward Boston. You watch as colonial militias fire from behind trees, stone walls, and farmhouse windows. This isn't gentleman's warfare. This is what historians will later call guerrilla tactics. Though right now, it just feels like doing what works when you're outnumbered and half-trained. One British officer describes the retreat as a moving circle of fire. You don't doubt him. Smoke clings to your clothes. Every farmhouse seems to spit bullets. And even though the colonists suffer losses too, it's clear the Redcoats didn't expect this level of fight. Back in Boston, the British regroup and dig in. You do the same, only your side's outside the city, surrounding it in a rough ring. Militiamen pour in from across New England. You camp under a canvas tent that leaks if you look at it wrong. Your meals? Mostly salt pork, and something that might be dried apples. You're not sure anymore. And here's where things get real. This isn't just a scuffle now. This is siege warfare. Boston is bottled up, and both sides wait for the next move. News travels slowly, but when it does, it hits hard. The Continental. Congress meets again in Philadelphia, and this time they're not just writing angry letters. They appoint a commander-in-chief. You gather with the others to hear the name, George Washington. You imagine someone with a booming voice and dramatic cape. Instead, he arrives quietly, tall and reserved, with calm eyes and an impressive set of teeth. Not all real, but we won't ruin the image just yet. He's from Virginia, which is deliberate. The Congress wants to show that this rebellion isn't just a Massachusetts tantrum. It's continental. You watch Washington inspect the troops, many of whom barely know which end of the musket to point. He doesn't flinch, doesn't shout. He just starts organizing, training, planning. Meanwhile, the British fortify Boston. You hear stories of them tearing down houses for firewood, commandeering supplies, and building makeshift walls. Inside, General Gage plays defense while waiting for reinforcements. And the countryside? Oh, it's buzzing. More militias, more flags, more pamphlets accusing the British of tyranny. You notice a funny pattern. The more Parliament tries to control the colonies, the more people who didn't care before suddenly start picking sides. Historians still argue whether this escalation was inevitable, or if better diplomacy could have saved the day. But at this point, you're not feeling very diplomatic. One night, you sneak down a dark path near a British checkpoint. You hear singing, British soldiers, homesick and drunk, warbling about Rule Britannia. It hits you then. They're kids, just like you, wearing the wrong colors. The irony? A few years earlier, you might have fought alongside them against the French. Now you wonder if you'll have to kill them. You return to camp under a sky thick with stars. Boston glows faintly in the distance. Washington paces near a fire, deep in thought. He knows this siege can't last forever. Something big is coming, but for now the city holds. And so do you. Wrapped in your blanket, you fall asleep to the distant crackle of firewood, the smell of gun oil, and the unsettling quiet before the storm. The air feels strange, tense, metallic, like it's waiting for something. And it is. So are you. It's June 1775, and Boston's still sealed tight like a bottle of angry bees. But something's about to pop the cork. You wake to murmurs rippling through the camp. Redcoats are on the move. Word spreads. They're coming to take the high ground across the Charles River, specifically Bunker Hill, which, fun fact, won't be the actual hill you fight on. That'll be Breed's Hill, slightly closer to Boston. Historians still debate why the battle is named after the wrong mound of dirt. Branding, maybe? You're marched out in the dark with shovel in hand, not a musket. All night you dig, piling up earthen fortifications in silence. The city twinkles in the distance. By dawn, you're a sunburn away from being an open target. But the high ground is yours. And then you hear it. Drums. British troops begin crossing the water. You peer over the fortifications. Redcoats in tight rows, bayonets gleaming. They're wearing wool in June, which tells you something about British military priorities. Fashion before function. Your commanding officer, Colonel Prescott, issues the now famous line, "Don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes." You're not sure he actually said it, but it does make you hold your breath. The British march uphill twice and are repelled both times in a blaze of musket fire and black powder smoke. Your shoulder is sore from reloading, ears ringing, eyes stinging. A cannonball skips past you, plowing a furrow in the dirt. This isn't a skirmish, it's a furnace. Then comes the third assault. You reach for more powder, and your hands close around nothing. The supplies dry. You look up just in time to see the red line advancing again. This time you can't stop them. Bayonets flash. The line collapses. You scramble backward, leaping over the fort wall, running past bodies and dropped weapons. The British take the hill, but at a cost that shocks them. Over 1,000 casualties. Your side loses fewer than half that. The result? Technically a British victory. Spiritually, not even close. The colonies learn they can stand toe-to-toe with the most powerful army on Earth. The Redcoats? They learn it might be a very long war. Back at camp, you nurse a bruised ankle and dig dirt from your ears. Someone passes you a tin cup of something, warm and questionably alcoholic. You sip it slowly. War is here. Not coming. Here. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, King George III is feeling less than thrilled. He receives the news and declares the colonies in open rebellion. He hires thousands of Hessian mercenaries, German soldiers who, to you, look both terrifying and confused by New England food. And still, your side hesitates to fully declare independence. It's like standing in the rain and debating whether to call it a storm. But Washington? He's thinking ahead. He knows Boston can't be held without artillery. And that's where Henry Knox enters the scene. A former bookseller with zero military experience and apparently unlimited optimism. Knox volunteers to go to Fort Ticonderoga, way up in New York, and bring back the cannons captured there. Small. Catch. It's 300 miles. In winter, over mountains, with oxen. You think he's lost his mind. But somehow, weeks later, there he is, rolling back into camp with 60 tons of artillery, frozen eyebrows, and a grin that says, "Told you so." The journey will later be called the Noble Train of Artillery. You just call it absurd. Washington wastes no time. In March 1776, under cover of night, you help drag those cannons to Dorchester Heights, looming over Boston like a stern librarian. By morning, they're pointed directly at the British fleet in the harbor. The reaction is immediate. The British blink. They know they're cornered. So they pack up and leave. Just like that. On March 17th, British troops and loyalists evacuate Boston. No battle, no bloodshed, just a sudden, glorious emptiness. You walk into the city cautiously, heart pounding, boots echoing on brick streets now eerily quiet. Shops are shuttered, papers blow past, but it's yours, for now. And here's the twist. This wasn't just a battle for a city. It was a morale earthquake. Colonists see that a scrappy band of farmers, tradesmen, and volunteers just forced an imperial army to retreat. Washington becomes a legend. Overnight you see his image on toasts, coins, and tavern signs. You start hearing the word liberty thrown around like it's something tangible, something real, but you also start noticing the cracks. Loyalists, those who support the crown, are suddenly very quiet, or they're gone, or they're being shouted down in the town square. Not everyone agrees on this revolution business, and it's starting to show. In the South, slaveholding colonies eye the rebellion with a mix of opportunity and dread. Will liberty mean liberty for all? You're not so sure. Neither are they. It's a shadow hanging just out of reach. Back in Minot, Philadelphia, the Continental Congress watches Boston's liberation with cautious hope. But war isn't confined to Massachusetts anymore. There's talk of Canada, of the Carolinas, of global alliances. This is getting bigger than anyone imagined. And yet, you still don't have a flag, or an anthem, or crucially, a nation. Now you have muskets, muddy boots, and a glimmer of belief that maybe this could actually work. You lie on your cot that night, the city quiet at last, and think, what comes next? You find yourself in a tavern in Philadelphia, candlelight dancing off tankards, the smell of roasted meat clinging to the walls. Men sit around long wooden tables, arguing with a level of passion usually reserved for sports or family inheritance squabbles. But this isn't idle chatter. This is the Second Continental Congress, and they're deciding whether to start a country from scratch. You're not technically a delegate, but let's pretend. You watch John Adams pace like a caffeinated schoolteacher. You hear Thomas Jefferson speaking softly but writing furiously. And Benjamin Franklin? He lounges like he owns the place, cracking jokes one moment, offering sage advice the next. He's that one uncle who's somehow always right, even while slightly tipsy. Outside these hallowed halls, the colonies are in chaos. British forces regroup in Canada and the South. Loyalists grumble under their breath. Patriots argue over how independent they really want to be. And still, the Congress hesitates. You get it. Declaring independence isn't just risky, it's a cosmic leap of faith. If you win, you get freedom. If you lose, you hang, literally. No pressure. And yet, the pressure builds. Pamphlets fan the flames, especially one little firecracker called Common Sense, written by Thomas Paine. It's 47 pages of pure revolution fuel. You read it by firelight, every line stinging like vinegar in a paper cut. He calls kings crowned ruffians, monarchy a fraud, and Britain an unfit parent who's long overdue for a breakup. And here's the kicker. It's wildly popular. Like early Taylor Swift album drop popular. Suddenly, even farmers who've never seen a booker quoting Paine while they plow. So Congress shifts. Slowly. Reluctantly. By June, they're assembling a committee to draft a declaration. The job falls to Jefferson, mostly because he writes beautifully and owns fewer enemies than Adams. You slip into Jefferson's study. He's hunched over a desk, candle flickering, carefully crafting phrases like a sculptor chiseling marble. All men are created equal, he writes, even though awkwardly he owns slaves. Historians still argue whether Jefferson truly meant all men, or just a certain kind. Either way, the contradiction sticks in your throat. He rails against King George like a lawyer reading receipts, lists grievances like a Yelp review from someone who's had it up to here. The final draft is refined, trimmed, and made as bulletproof as 18th century paper can be. July 2nd, Congress votes. July 4th, they approve the text. You watch the delegates sign it one by one, a parade of ink and trembling hands. John Hancock goes first, famously flamboyant, his signature large enough to see, from space or at least across the room. You imagine him thinking, if I'm going to hang, I want the king to know who did it. Outside, bells ring. Crowds cheer. You hear someone shout, "We're free!" But deep down, you know better. The words are beautiful, stirring. But now you have to earn them. The war hasn't paused for paperwork. In fact, it's about to get worse. The British aren't sulking. They're steaming. Reinforcements arrive, and soon you're bound for New York City, where the next chapter unfolds like a war epic. You march south with Washington and the newly christened Continental Army. It's hot. Your uniform scratches. The boots? Still awful. You camp in the swamps and shuffle into Manhattan, a city buzzing with tension. Washington's plan? Defend it. Bad idea. The British land on Staten Island like a tidal wave. 32,000 soldiers, including the infamous Hessians. These guys aren't here to debate. They're here to win. What follows is a series of defeats so dismal you almost miss the forests of Massachusetts. First, the Battle of Long Island. You try to hold your ground in Brooklyn, but you're outflanked and outgunned. Smoke curls over the hills. The redcoats keep coming. By nightfall, you're retreating. And not just once. The whole New York campaign becomes a terrifying game of don't get captured. Washington zigzags through New Jersey, trying to keep the army from falling apart. You cross rivers, climb hills, dodge bayonets, and morale plummets. Desertions skyrocket. Supplies vanish. Congress flees Philadelphia like someone pulled the fire alarm. You start to wonder if this whole independence thing is going to end in a sad little footnote. Then comes Trenton. It's Christmas 1776. You're freezing. You haven't eaten properly in days. And now, Washington wants to cross the Delaware River at night, in a blizzard, to attack Hessian troops who've probably just opened their first round of brandy and roast goose. You think he's nuts, but you row anyway. The river is a mess of ice chunks and angry wind. Your hands go numb on the oars. Cannons tip dangerously. Horses slip. It's less sneaky raid and more floating disaster. But by morning, you're on the other side. The attack begins. At dawn, you crash into Trenton like a thunderclap. The Hessians are caught totally off guard. Some are literally still in their pajamas. Within an hour, the battle is over. Nearly 1,000 enemy soldiers are captured. 0 American lives. Lost in combat, it's a miracle. Or maybe just the first real win. Days later, you do it again at Princeton. Another surprise. Another victory. You can feel the tide turning. Just a little. Washington rides past, nodding solemnly. No grand speech, no parade, just a flicker of hope in his eyes. He's not just trying to survive now, he's planning how to win. Back in camp, you sit near the fire and unwrap your feet, which are starting to look more like soggy radishes than human appendages. But still, you smile, because you're starting to believe. The British may have the numbers, the uniforms, the Navy, but you've got grit. And apparently, very poor judgment about when not to cross a frozen river. Your breath fogs in the cold dawn air as you look east toward the smoky horizon. You've won at Trenton and Princeton, and though you still smell faintly of wet wool and despair, something inside you shifts. You don't feel quite so doomed anymore, but if you think this war is about to get easier, let's go ahead and pop that dream like a soggy canteen. Because 1777 is about to test you in ways that'll make Trenton feel like a spirited game of dodgeball. Let's start with the British plan. One so complicated it might have been drawn up by someone halfway through a bottle of port. General Lyme, John Burgoyne, the poster boy for British aristocratic swagger, decides to march south from Canada through the dense forests of upstate New York, aiming to seize control of the Hudson River Valley and split the colonies in two. Sounds good on paper. On paper, you also have shoes. Anyway, Burgoyne's expecting backup from General Howe moving up from New York City and a smaller force coming from the west. The idea is that they'll all meet near Albany like a charming picnic of British domination. But coordination? Not exactly their strong suit. Here's the thing. Howe never gets the memo, or more accurately, ignores the memo. He's got his eyes on Philadelphia instead, the rebel capital, which he thinks is just begging for a royal visit. So while Burgoyne hauls his army and their 30 wagons of personal belongings, yes, including a wardrobe and champagne, through the wilderness, Howe is cruising down the coast like he's late for a garden party. You, meanwhile, are slogging through Pennsylvania, guarding Congress's new hideout and trying not to think too hard about how many more winters your toes can survive. Howe lands in Maryland, marches inland, and you clash with his forces at Brandywine Creek. It's a mess. You're outflanked. Again. Washington fights hard, but has to retreat. Philadelphia falls. You're back to square one, with your boots in. The mud in your dreams a bit flatter than yesterday. Then Germantown. Another stab at retaking the city. Another loss. The fog rolls in so thick you can't see your own outstretched hand. Troops fire at shadows. Entire units get lost like tourists without a map. The British hold firm. You retreat again. You'd think morale would be gone. But weirdly, it's not. Washington's army is learning. Slower than you'd like, sure, but still learning. You're not breaking. Not yet. Back in the north, though, Burgoyne is discovering what it means to underestimate the American wilderness and Americans with axes. Militia and local rebels swarm the forests around his army, felling trees to block roads, cutting supply lines, sniping from behind trees like ghosts with muskets. His slow-moving army grinds to a halt. You're not there personally, but you hear the stories. The battle at Freeman's Farm, the standoff at Bemis Heights, and finally, October 17th, 1777, Burgoyne surrenders at Saratoga. Entire army, gone. It's a thunderclap heard across the Atlantic. For the first time, the British look beatable. More than that, they look defeatable. But here's the real payoff. France hears the news. Now, France has been watching this little rebellion with amused curiosity, partly because they love a good drama, but mostly because they really don't like the British. Losing the 7 Years' War still stings. And now they see an opportunity. Ben Franklin, silver-haired and ever the diplomat, has been lounging in Paris like a colonial celebrity, charming nobles and toasting revolution over glasses of Burgundy. When Saratoga happens, France stops flirting and starts planning. By early 1778, they're all in. Military alliance, naval support, troops. You've just leveled up, majorly. Spain and the Dutch will also join the anti-British party later because apparently Europe's been waiting for someone to take the first swing. So, yay, international support. But let's not get ahead of ourselves because the winter of 1777-1778 has other plans for you. One word, Valley Forge. You arrive there in December, just outside Philadelphia. Washington chooses the site for its defensibility, but the comforts, let's just say the Yelp review would not be kind. You build log huts with freezing fingers. Food is scarce. Disease spreads like a nasty rumor. Clothes rot. Blankets are hoarded like treasure. If you've ever considered boiling your shoes for soup, welcome to Valley Forge. And yet something extraordinary happens here, not flashy, not dramatic, but essential. Enter Baron Friedrich von Steuben, a Prussian officer with a penchant for colorful language, extravagant uniforms, and precisely zero English vocabulary. He steps into camp and immediately starts whipping things into shape. Literally, you train, march, drill, over and over. Von Steuben teaches you how to load your musket in 8 steps instead of 15, how to march in formation, how to use a bayonet for more than roasting marshmallows. At first, you hate it. It's cold, it's humiliating. He yells a lot, even when you can't understand the words. But gradually you feel the shift. You move as a unit. You start to look and fight like a real army. This isn't just survival anymore. It's transformation. Washington watches, quiet and tired but resolute. He knows the war won't be won by sheer spirit. It'll be won by grit, training, and not dying of dysentery in a log cabin. By spring, the mood lifts. Supplies finally arrive. Food improves. Uniforms are stitched, rifles cleaned. You feel ready. For the first time, really ready. You emerge from Valley Forge in June not as a scattered band of volunteers but as soldiers. The British see it too. When you clash at the Battle of Monmouth that summer, it's a slog in unbearable heat. Soldiers collapse from exhaustion, but you stand your ground. You hold the line, and when the British pull back, it's not because they pity you. It's because you held your own. And somewhere along the road, as you march with your musket slung and your boots finally intact, you realize something. This revolution, it's not a spark anymore. It's a flame, and it's spreading. You're still shaking off the memory of Washington's appointment when you find yourself stuck in the middle of an uneasy standoff. The city of Boston is no longer just a flashpoint. It's a tinderbox. British redcoats clutch their muskets on one side of the city's defenses, while ragtag rebels, your fellow colonists, have surrounded them in a growing ring of earthworks and icy determination. The siege of Boston has begun, and you, lucky you, are right in the middle of it. The months crawl. You dig trenches with frozen hands and sleep under threadbare blankets while a bitter New England winter gnaws at your toes. Supplies are short, spirits are shorter. You chew on hardtack that could double as paving stones, boil leather for soup, and thank the heavens whenever someone manages to trade with the nearby towns for food, or sneak it in past British patrols. And yet, even in the freezing dark, the sense of purpose glows stubbornly. This isn't just about Boston anymore. It's about proving the colonies won't back down. Washington walks among you sometimes, silent but towering, inspecting the fortifications with eyes that miss nothing. He's not flashy, no stirring speeches, no galloping into battle with a saber in his teeth, but when he speaks, the men listen, and when he doesn't, they still straighten their backs a little. He's determined to turn this angry mob into an army. The British, meanwhile, are trapped in the city like unwelcome guests who've overstayed their welcome. General Howe and his officers drink brandy, attend plays, and throw parties to keep up appearances, but they can't ignore that their situation is getting tighter by the day. Fresh food is almost impossible to come by, and rumors swirl that some redcoats are paying absurd prices just for eggs or onions. A few desperate soldiers reportedly resort to boiling grass for soup, not exactly the lavish empire fare they were promised. You know a direct attack would be suicide. Bunker Hill taught everyone that much. So you wait and dig and freeze, hoping something, anything, will shift the balance. And then, like something out of a fever dream, cannon begin to arrive. Not just any cannon. These are heavy guns dragged hundreds of miles through snow and mountains from Fort Ticonderoga by a bookseller named Henry Knox. That's right, a bookseller. One day he's hawking pamphlets in Boston. The next, he's hauling 60 tons of artillery through the frozen wilderness using oxen, sleds, and sheer insanity. Historians still argue whether Knox's feat was strategic genius or logistical madness, but it worked. The British, looking out from their cozy city posts one morning, suddenly see looming guns staring down at them from the high ground of Dorchester Heights. Guns they had no idea were coming. You're there when Washington makes his quiet gamble. Under cover of night, you help haul the cannons into position, wrapping wheels in hay to muffle the sound. By dawn, British officers blink at a nightmare. Made real, their enemies have the high ground and there's not much they can do about it. Howe considers an assault, but storms roll in as if nature herself is sick of the war. By the time the weather clears, the position is too strong. So just like that, the British announce they're leaving. They'll evacuate Boston if the rebels let them go without a fight. Washington agrees. He wants them gone, not slaughtered. And gone they go, on March 17, 1776. Evacuation day, if you're keeping score. The redcoats board ships with their tails between their legs, and you and your fellow rebels cautiously move into the city. The streets still reek of desperation and old smoke, but Boston is yours again. You'd think victory would mean a proper celebration. Champagne corks flying, flags waving, street dancing, someone inventing sparklers a century early. But mostly, you just feel tired, like you've just finished holding your breath for 11 months and finally exhaled. Some soldiers cry, others just sit down and finally eat warm food. You stretch your legs and walk the now silent streets, stepping past cannonballs embedded in walls and windows boarded up months ago. You pass a church and see bullet holes in the wooden pews. A reminder, war didn't just visit Boston. It moved in, rearranged the furniture, and left blood on the floorboards. Still, there's pride here too. Washington's gamble worked. Knox's sled journey turned the tide. And the colonists? They proved they could trap, wait out, and outmaneuver one of the most powerful armies in the world. A quirky little story spreads, probably embroidered with each retelling, that a British officer left behind a note expressing surprise that such a rabble could win a siege. Whether it's true or not, you tuck the line away with a grin. That rabble is starting to look like something dangerously close to a real army. But as you step over the threshold of your old home, reclaimed at last, you already sense what's next. Boston was just the first brick in a wall that's going to take years to build. The redcoats are retreating, not surrendering. They'll be back. Somewhere, somehow. So you rest. Briefly, you pull your coat tighter and look south, where rumors whisper of British reinforcements, and where the next battles are already brewing. You barely have time to shake the Boston snow from your boots before the scent of ink and rebellion fills the air. Now you're in Philadelphia, where horse hooves echo off cobbled streets and the city buzzes with something electric. Not lanterns or lightning, it's words. And tonight, those words are going to change everything. Inside the Pennsylvania State House, what future generations will call Independence Hall, you find yourself crammed into a stifling room with open windows that don't help. The ceiling fan creaks, paper rustles, and men argue, loudly, for hours, about taxes, tyranny, and whether it's completely bonkers to tell the British Empire to take a hike. Still, the room is alive with something deeper than debate. You're standing among dreamers, farmers, lawyers, smugglers, and even a few reluctant moderates, each scribbling notes, swatting flies, and wrestling with the terrifying idea of independence. Thomas Jefferson sits hunched at a desk, his long fingers smudged with ink, trying to make this revolution sound poetic. He's not flashy in conversation, he mumbles really, but when he writes, the guy might as well be wielding a musket made of metaphor. You lean over and see the first few lines of a draft forming, talking about truths being self-evident, and how all men are created equal. Big words, bigger stakes. The debates rage on around him. John Adams paces furiously, face red, arms flailing like a man trying to swat away not just flies, but British rule itself. Benjamin Franklin, in contrast, leans back in his chair with his trademark sly smirk, sipping something you're pretty sure isn't water. You suspect he already knows how this will end, and he's just enjoying the chaos in the meantime. Outside, word spreads through the streets. Something big is coming. People gather in taverns and alleys, whispering about liberty, about what would happen if these delegates actually signed that piece of parchment. Would it mean freedom or gallows? Historians still argue whether most delegates were truly ready for full-blown independence when they arrived in Philadelphia, or if events, like that mess in Boston, pushed them over the edge. Either way, once the writing is done, you feel the room shift. The mood is no longer about if, but when. July 2nd, 1776. The motion passes. The colonies vote to declare independence. But the date you'll remember is July 4th, when the final wording gets approved and printed copies roll off the press like rebel propaganda birthday cards. You clutch one hot off the plate, ink still drying, and read those famous words aloud. We hold these truths to be self-evident. It sends a chill up your spine. Or maybe that's just the sweat cooling in this heat. You step into the street, declaration in hand. Bells ring, cannons boom, and the people of Philadelphia cheer loud enough to wake the dead, or at least make King George sneeze across the ocean. You see shopkeepers closing early just to celebrate, children climbing lampposts waving hastily sewn flags, and a man dressed as a British officer getting mock-tarred and feathered with nothing stickier than molasses and pillow stuffing. But underneath, the revelry, the fear lingers. This isn't a letter to Santa. It's a middle finger to a king. Everyone knows that signing your name to this document is an invitation to get your property seized, your family threatened, or your neck stretched by a noose. That's why John Hancock signs his name so absurdly large. So, as legend has it, Fat George in England can read it without his spectacles. Bold move, Hancock. You glance at the others, wondering who will survive long enough for history to remember them. Back in the printing house, Dunlap's broadside copies of the Declaration spread like wildfire. Riders take them across the colonies. Public readings are held in city squares and churchyards. You help tack one to a tavern door in New York, where people pause mid-mug to stare at the treasonous prose. One man weeps, another laughs, a third spits on the ground and mutters that the British will squash you like bugs, and they just might, because while the ink's still drying, British ships are already amassing in the harbor. Massive ones, frightening ones, the kind that blot out the horizon and make your musket feel about as effective as a slingshot against a hurricane. New York will be next. That's already clear. But you stand in that charged silence, one foot on the threshold of rebellion and the other on the tightrope of hope. You carry a copy of the Declaration with you that night. It's just a piece of paper, really, but it's also a fuse. You fold it carefully, slip it into your coat, and start walking. Because the war you've been fighting so far, that was just the preamble. You wake up to the salty stink of gunpowder and ash. New York is burning, and you're running, not because you want to, but because you have to. The British have arrived in force, and what began as a defiant stand is rapidly becoming a desperate escape. It started with sails, dozens of them, then hundreds. You stood on the cliffs and watched the British Navy glide into New York Harbor like a floating forest, each mast crowned with red, white, and menace. Over 30,000 troops, Germans too, Hessians, hired muscle from across the sea. You hear their guttural accents in the streets and wonder if they even know what they're fighting for, or if they just signed up for a paycheck and the promise of stolen colonial cider. George Washington, yes, still in charge, still very tall, knows he's outnumbered, outgunned, and probably out of luck. But he also knows New York is strategically vital. So he digs in. You dig with him. Trenches, redoubts, barricades, anything to slow the wave that's about to hit, and hit it does. The Battle of Long Island isn't just a loss, it's a rout. You scramble through swampy terrain as British forces flank you with terrifying ease. Smoke blinds you, bayonets gleam, and the air fills with the kind of shouting that makes your stomach turn. Soldiers disappear in the fog, some captured, some worse, and for a brief, nauseating moment, you think this revolution might already be over. But Washington somehow refuses to panic. In one of the war's greatest disappearing acts, he organizes a nighttime evacuation across the East River. Boats silently glide through mist. You help muffle oars with strips of cloth, praying the British don't notice until it's too late. By dawn, the entire army has vanished from Brooklyn. You're exhausted, soaked, and still alive. Barely. The retreat becomes the rhythm of your days. You fall back through Harlem Heights, White Plains, and into New Jersey. The British chase close. Behind their drums echoing through cold November streets, you lose shoes, you lose friends, you lose track of which town you're in. You never lose the feeling that you're just one mistake from disaster. The British occupy Manhattan, smug in their victory. Bonfires crackle in confiscated homes, and the Union Jack flaps over a city you once called your own. Loyalists toast with British officers, and suspected rebels get cozy new accommodations in overcrowded prison ships. One notorious vessel, the HMS Jersey, becomes a floating coffin where thousands perish from disease, neglect, and cruelty. You don't dare get caught. Still, amid the chaos, there are moments that crackle with stubborn fire. At the Battle of Harlem Heights, you help hold a ridge just long enough to bloody the redcoats and boost sagging morale. Washington rides past you afterward, nodding, not smiling, not cheering, just nodding. You swear you see the faintest flicker of pride behind those serious eyes. You find a moment's peace in the countryside near Morristown, where the army pauses to catch its breath. Locals bring what food they can spare. Apples, bread, sometimes even meat. You sleep in barns, read scraps of newspapers, and swap jokes about British fashion. Seriously, who marches into battle wearing that many buttons? But every laugh is edged with tension. Winter is coming, and your army's falling apart. Desertions are high, supplies are low, and worse, the revolutionary cause is starting to look like a long shot. One night you hear Thomas Paine's words read aloud by firelight. These are the times that try men's souls. He's not wrong. You nod along, shivering, knowing that the easy part, shouting about liberty from behind a tavern table, is over. This part, the freezing, bleeding, losing part, this is where you find out who really believes. Meanwhile, British General Howe tries to play chess with promises. He sends feelers to Congress. Maybe this whole war thing can be solved with some light submission and an apology. Congress responds by passing his letter around and laughing until the candle wax burns low. Historians still argue whether Howe's reluctance to crush Washington's army outright in New York was strategic hesitation or gentlemanly miscalculation. Either way, it gives you time, just enough to escape, regroup, and wonder if there's any hope left. Then, as winter tightens its grip, things somehow get worse. Your enlistment is almost up. Your boots are more whole than leather. And you hear whispers that Washington might be planning something bold, or suicidal, or both. Either way, you're staying. Because if you leave now, what was all this suffering even for? You look back at New York one last time. The skyline is jagged and smoky. You squint at it across the icy river and feel a mix of fury and grief. That city belonged to the Revolution once. Now it's a British playground. But you'll be back. Someday. With a better plan. And maybe with shoes. For now, you keep moving south, trailing Washington across New Jersey toward the Delaware River, where snowflakes melt on your eyelashes and history waits with its fingers crossed. You stare across the Delaware River on Christmas night, and it doesn't look like a bold plan. It looks like suicide in slow motion. Ice chunks bob on the black water like floating tombstones. The wind cuts through your coat as if it has a personal grudge, and yet here you are, freezing, aching, clutching a damp musket, waiting to climb, into a boat under cover of night. Washington's idea is simple. Insane, but simple. Cross the icy river in the dead of night. March through a blizzard. Surprise a garrison of Hessian soldiers in Trenton before breakfast. Your part? Don't die of frostbite. As the boats launch, everything is wet, dark, and miserable. You huddle next to a big man with a Pennsylvania accent who won't stop complaining about his toes. Cannon barrels rattle against the wooden sides of the Durham boats. You grip a rope and stare out into the storm where sleet needles your face and oars creak like haunted door hinges. Behind you, General Washington stands tall, unshakable, unreadable, wrapped in his cloak. He's watching the crossing like a man, trying to will the entire army through sheer force of moral backbone. You can't decide if it's inspiring or just incredibly stubborn. The crossing takes hours. The boats move in slow, painful sweeps through the ice-choked water. Some soldiers slip. One falls in and has to be yanked back, teeth chattering. Horses struggle in the cold. Cannon wheels freeze. But somehow, miraculously, you all make it across. Barely. Then comes the march. 9 miles through snow so thick, your boots vanish into it. You trudge silently in the dark, your breath fogging in the moonlight. The wind howls. You can't feel your fingers, or your nose. You pass men slumped on the roadside, too cold to keep going. You want to stop too, but you don't. Something about the madness of this mission makes quitting feel worse than freezing. By the time you reach the outskirts of Trenton just before dawn, you're moving more out of momentum than energy. But you still remember to load your musket. You still remember why you're here. Trenton is quiet, no guards, no patrols. The Hessians are asleep, full of holiday drink and German carols. And then, chaos. You burst into town with your fellow soldiers, boots crunching snow, muskets firing. Shouts in German echo between houses. Smoke swirls in the narrow streets. You see Hessians in long coats stumble out of their barracks, eyes wide, muskets half lifted. It's over quickly. The Hessian commander, Colonel Rahl, is mortally wounded, having famously dismissed earlier warnings of an American attack. You capture nearly 900 prisoners without losing a single man in the fight. You can hardly believe it. For once, everything actually works. It feels like waking up in the middle of a nightmare and realizing you've punched the monster square in the face. But it doesn't end there. Washington isn't done. He crosses back over the Delaware, prisoners in tow, only to decide, 2 days later, to do it all over again. You groan, loudly, but you follow. Back across the river you go. More marching, more cold, and then, the Battle of Princeton, another sharp, short clash where you help outmaneuver British forces and send them packing. It's not a grand victory, but it's just enough to rattle British confidence and rekindle American hope. These twin victories, Trenton and Princeton, are a much-needed jolt. Suddenly, people believe again. Morale surges. Enlistments go up. Even some of those doubting congressmen stop arguing long enough to smile. You return to camp not just alive, but triumphant. Historians still argue whether the impact of these battles was more psychological than strategic, but you don't need a textbook to tell you how much it mattered. You saw it in your comrades' faces. Tired, frostbitten, grinning like idiots as they warmed their hands over smoky fires and traded tales of how they scared the Hessians right out of their boots. Even back in London, the news shakes things up. Parliament can't believe the ragtag rebels pulled it off. They double down, of course, sending more troops, demanding harsher responses. But you can feel the shift. This isn't just a colonial tantrum anymore. It's a real fight. And so you keep marching. You patch your coat with scraps of old canvas. You clean your musket with a rag that used to be part of someone's apron. You eat stale biscuits and bitter coffee and wonder if you'll ever feel warm again. But deep down, something's changed. The revolution's not just a cause now. It's a story you're living. And for once, your side just flipped the script. You wake to the sound of teeth chattering. Not someone else's, but your own. Snow has drifted into the tent again, and your blanket feels more like a suggestion than a shield. Around you, men stir sluggishly, bundled in mismatched rags and patched coats. Welcome to Valley Forge. You've been through cold before, but this is different. This is the kind of cold that sinks into your bones and squats there, growing mold. It's the winter of 1777, 1778, and the Continental Army has set up camp about 20 miles outside Philadelphia, now under British control. Washington chose this spot because it's defensible and close enough to keep tabs on the enemy. But he didn't exactly order good weather or a decent food supply. You're not alone. About 12,000 soldiers are here with you, building log huts from frozen timber, trying to stay alive. Over the weeks, thousands will desert. Others will die, mainly from disease, not bullets. Dysentery, typhus, smallpox. The air smells of smoke, sickness, and something worse, despair. You chew bark sometimes. You consider eating your leather pouch. Washington walks among the men daily, solemn and tall, like a frostbitten statue with a heart that refuses to give in. He's thinner now, quieter, but his presence anchors you. He's not running, and if he's not running, maybe you won't either. The army here is in shambles, barely an army at all. Some men don't even have shoes. You stuff scraps of cloth into your boots, but frostbite still nibbles your toes like an impatient rat. Morale is lower than a snake's belly in a trench. You wonder if all those fiery speeches about liberty were just noise to keep you marching toward misery. But then, change arrives, and he's got a heavy accent and a mustache you could lose a squirrel in. Baron Friedrich von Steuben, a Prussian officer, swaggering in from Europe with crisp uniforms, a cursing problem, and a nose for order. You don't trust him at first. None of you do. He struts through the camp, correcting your posture and barking commands that get translated 3 times before anyone understands them. But he's relentless and weirdly funny, and he knows what he's doing. He rewrites your drills, your formations, your entire military existence. At first you grumble, then you start to move in sync. Lines tighten, muskets reload faster, commands click. You stop being a collection of tired farmhands with weapons and start becoming a functioning army. It's a transformation. Slow, painful, but real. Under von Steuben's gruff mentorship, you learn to march like you mean it. You practice bayonet, drills until your arms ache. You even start to believe, just a little, that maybe you're not doomed after all. Food still sucks, by the way. Congress is barely functioning and supply lines are a joke. You get your rations late or not at all. You eat fire cakes, flour and water mashed into discs and cooked over embers. They taste like ashes glued together with regret. You hear talk of a Conway cabal, officers and politicians whispering behind Washington's back, questioning his leadership. But the rumors die down quickly. Loyalty holds, barely. Occasionally, local Quakers or sympathetic farmers bring supplies. You're not proud of how excited you get over a turnip. But in Valley Forge, a turnip can be the difference between despair and something resembling hope. You scribble letters home. Some never arrive. You sing songs to stay sane. And when a group of Oneida warriors show up to help, offering corn and a alliance, you realize not every native nation has turned away from the rebel cause. The Oneida bring more than food. They bring solidarity. A reminder that liberty, however flawed, is still worth fighting for. Historians still argue whether Valley Forge was more myth than miracle. There's no dramatic battle here. No enemy. Charge. Just survival. But you know better. The crucible of this winter forges something stronger than steel. Discipline. Unity. Resolve. It hardens you in ways a battlefield never could. And then, spring. Green returns to the woods. Streams unfreeze. The sun rises earlier and actually brings warmth with it. You're still thin, still tired, but you're upright. And you're ready. By June, the army that limped into Valley Forge stumbles back out. Not victorious, but transformed. You march in columns now, heads up, muskets gleaming. You know your place in the line. You trust the man next to you. You're no longer just surviving. You're preparing to fight again. Properly this time. And just in time, too. Because the war's far from over. Philadelphia is still occupied. The British are shifting strategies. And France, yes, France, has started sending more than just sympathy. But for now, as you break camp and head into a warmer wind, you look back one last time. Valley Forge lies behind you. Muddy, smoky, quiet. A frozen graveyard for some, but a proving ground for the rest. You smile slightly, your feet still hurt. But you walk taller now. You sip suspiciously sweet wine as powdered French aristocrats pledge ships, soldiers, and symphonies to the cause. You don't speak a word of French, but you nod anyway, smiling politely through mouthfuls of oversweet Bordeaux and awkward diplomatic silences. The powdered gentlemen around you clink crystal glasses, flounce lace cuffs, and call each other mon ami, while toasting the future of a scrappy American experiment they mostly don't understand. It's 1778, and after years of teasing, hint-dropping, and secret gift-giving, France has finally jumped headfirst into your war against Britain. Of course, it's not entirely out of love for liberty. France has its own bruises from past wars with Britain, especially the humiliating loss in the 7 Years' War. Helping the American colonies rebel isn't just idealism, it's sweet revenge wrapped in Enlightenment vocabulary and sealed with a very expensive wax stamp. But still, help is help. You lean forward at the long treaty table in Paris where just weeks ago, Benjamin Franklin, yes, the guy with the kite and the key, inked a formal alliance. Somehow, the man has charmed everyone from duchesses to diplomats with his wit, homespun wisdom, and, let's be honest, his utterly fake coonskin cap. The French love an American rustic, and Franklin's got the part down cold. You suspect he plays it up, but you don't mind. If it gets you ships and gunpowder, he can wear a full raccoon suit for all you care. Outside, rumors swirl through. The salons and coffee houses. The French people, especially the young idealists and restless intellectuals, are enchanted. A nation daring to break from monarchy, to write its own rules. It's revolutionary, literally. You hear Voltaire's name dropped between sips of chocolate and glimpses of pamphlets full of flowery praise for les Américains. Never mind that many of them think Delaware is a cheese. The point is, you now have allies, real ones, with fleets. Back in America, you feel the shift instantly. There's a strange new energy among the continental troops. The rations still suck, the boots still leak, but suddenly you've got hope, and news spreads fast when it's good. French gold starts to trickle in. Uniforms improve. So does morale. Lafayette, the teenage nobleman with a heart full of liberty and an allowance, big enough to buy a battalion, becomes a beloved figure. He's fluent in both strategy and flattery, and you find yourself liking him despite his impractically white trousers. He insists on eating with the men, fighting in the trenches, and hugging George Washington like a favorite uncle. And George, usually stony-eyed and formal, hugs back. But this alliance isn't just handshakes and hugs. You watch stunned from a hilltop as the Comte d'Estaing's fleet glides into harbor, sails white against the horizon, cannons bristling like sea serpents. Real naval power. For the first time, the British no longer own the ocean. It changes everything. Not that it all goes smoothly. Far from it. You remember the failed assault on Newport, Rhode Island, where poor coordination between American and French forces leads to a painful retreat. Tensions rise. The French want glory. The Americans want strategy. Tempers flare. Somewhere, between maps and mistranslations, trust wobbles. But then you see it rebuild. Inch by inch, joint training drills begin. Officers swap tactics, flags, and suspicious glances. Washington writes careful, respectful letters. French commanders practice their English, or at least mime it convincingly. Lafayette, always the diplomat, bridges gaps with charm and awkward jokes. Slowly, painfully, the awkward marriage of cultures begins to look more like a team. Meanwhile, British command is furious. They didn't expect France to fully commit. Now they face not just ragtag rebels, but a global enemy. Suddenly, they must defend Caribbean islands, guard their home, coast, and brace for a full-blown European showdown. The American rebellion becomes one front in a much bigger war. The chessboard expands and the British start running out of queens. You're still mostly freezing and underpaid. But now you're also optimistic. And there's music too. A French band marches into camp one crisp autumn morning, blasting regal anthems with flair and a little too much cymbal. The Americans blink in confusion, then smile. It's not your style, but you hum along anyway. Soon, drums and fifes mingle with violins and harpsichords. Strange combinations, strange rhythms, but somehow it works. Historians still argue whether France joined the war out of genuine belief in liberty or just to stick it to Britain. Probably both. The Versailles court may shimmer with gold and hypocrisy, but beneath the perfume and powdered wigs there are real stakes. France has staked its pride, its power, and its purse on your revolution. It cannot afford for you to lose. One night, you sit beside a campfire next to a young French officer trying desperately to learn how to roast a marshmallow. He drops it into the flame, swears in French. You both laugh. Liberté, he says with a grin, lifting a slightly charred stick. Liberté, you echo, clinking canteens. Somewhere far across the ocean, a storm brews. But here, in the muddy twilight of a makeshift camp, you feel something strange, like maybe this crazy thing might actually work. You pass coded messages in invisible ink, ducking British patrols and double agents in the shadows. It starts with a slip of parchment tucked beneath a loose floorboard. You nearly miss it, just a corner peeking out under dusty planks. But when you hold it to a candle, the letters bloom like ghosts on the page. Heat-reactive ink, invisible until summoned. You're not just a soldier now. You're a spy. Welcome to the Shadow War. While the battles rage openly in the fields and cities, there's another war pulsing beneath the surface. Quiet, patient, and terrifying. You've become part of the Continental Army's growing network of espionage. forged out of desperation and daring. Washington knows he can't beat the British with firepower alone, so he turns to secrets. The Culper Ring is born in silence. In New York, a city crawling with redcoats and loyalist whispers, ordinary people become extraordinary agents. A tavern keeper listens while pouring ale. A dry goods merchant leaves laundry on the line in coded patterns. A rider gallops through the woods with a message stitched into his saddle. No one wears a trench coat or says classified, but everything is coded. You're handed a cipher, an odd grid of numbers and symbols. Your fingers tremble the first time you use it. One mistake could expose everything. You memorize drop points. The hollow tree, the marked rock, the hayloft that creaks twice when you step inside. You carry no weapons, only a false identity and a poker face you're still practicing. It's not much comfort. British patrols are everywhere. They stop you once on a cold morning outside White Plains. "Where you headed?" One barks, eyeing your bulging satchel. Your voice doesn't shake miraculously. "Delivering eggs," you say. He pokes around, finds eggs, doesn't find the tiny scroll hidden in a false bottom under the yolks. You smile, barely. Later that night, the message is decoded. Enemy troops moving south, prepare ambush. You've just altered a battle before it began. That's how this war is won, not just with muskets, but with whispers. You meet others like you. There's Anna Strong, a Long Island woman with steely eyes and a clothesline full of coded flags. There's Hercules Mulligan. Yes, that's a real name. Tailor to British officers and secret patriot, slipping information through his apprentice. And there's Agent 355, a mysterious woman whose identity remains unknown even now. Historians still argue whether she was a well-placed socialite, a free black woman, or something in between. But she risked everything, and paid a price we'll never fully trace. The British have spies too, of course. You overhear them sometimes in captured letters. Smooth, British accented confidence, always so sure the rebellion is about to fizzle out. You chuckle under your breath. If only they knew about the messages hidden in quill barrels, the lemon juice ink, the fake merchants smuggling plans inside crates of molasses. It's like the world's deadliest game of hide and seek, and you're still playing. Sometimes it goes horribly wrong. You remember the day a fellow courier was caught, too slow to burn his note, too honest in his eyes. They hanged him outside a courthouse, left him for days as a warning. You don't eat much that week, but you don't stop either. You develop a routine. You wake up, check the wind, avoid the roads. You ride fast but never frantic. You learn to smile at danger, not because you're brave, but because it confuses the people hunting you. You hide ink in hollow coins. You scratch fake messages to throw off British trackers. You've become a kind of ghost, half soldier, half myth. You're summoned once to a clandestine meeting. Dark barn, 2 lanterns, one shadowy figure. He introduces himself only as Samuel. Later, you learn you met Benjamin Tallmadge himself, the ring's chief. His gaze is sharp, but he speaks softly. The quiet work matters most, he tells you. Without it, no victories hold. Back at headquarters, Washington reads your reports in private. He keeps them close. You hear he rarely even shares them with Congress. He knows the walls have ears. Even his own officers might not be fully trustworthy. In this war, loyalty is fluid, and ambition is often louder than honor. One day you find a note that simply reads, "The eagle soars at dawn." You don't know what it means, but you memorize it anyway. It's passed 3 more times before it becomes clear. The British are preparing a surprise attack. Thanks to you, it never lands. Later, when nothing explodes, no one thanks you, that's the job. By now, the art of spying has shaped the war in invisible ways. You've disrupted supply lines, exposed British plans, even unmasked traitors. One day you hear whispers of a high-ranking officer, someone American, someone trusted, who's been passing secrets to the enemy. The room grows cold. You pray. It's not true, but it is. More on that in a later section. You'll want a chair for that one. Even as the gunpowder settles after battles, the espionage never stops. Your nerves are always tight. You sleep with one eye open. You carry a tiny flask of vinegar to erase ink if caught. You've learned not to flinch when strangers ask where you're from. Eventually, you stop needing instructions. You start giving them. You train younger couriers, help refine codes, teach how to keep your voice flat and your stories consistent. The shadows feel like home now. It's not glamorous, but it's critical. Historians still debate how much the Culper Ring alone affected the outcome of the war. Some say it prevented defeats that would have ended everything. Others argue it was just one thread in a vast web. But you know this much. Without the web, the revolution would have unraveled. So you ride again, dust in your eyes, sweat down your back, parchment against your chest. You're not holding a musket. You're holding the truth. You sit in uneasy council fires as native nations face heartbreaking choices between loyalty and survival. The fire crackles low, casting long shadows on the council circle. Around you, the quiet isn't peace, it's pressure. Elder voices murmur in tones heavy with history, and the air smells of wood smoke and damp earth. The American Revolution isn't yours, not really, but it's found you anyway, and now you're expected to choose between a British crown and a budding republic, neither of which ever asked what you wanted. You listen as the Iroquois Confederacy, once strong, united and sovereign, fractures. Before your eyes, 6 nations bound together: Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, Seneca, and Tuscarora, a league that stood for centuries, wielding influence from the Great Lakes to the Hudson. But this foreign war creeps into your forests, disrupts your hunting grounds, and forces decisions no one wants to make. Should you side with the British, who promise protection and land, or with the Americans who speak of liberty but eye your territory like open farmland? There's no good answer. Joseph Brant, Thayendanegea, a fierce Mohawk leader educated in British schools, argues passionately for the crown. He's traveled to London, shaken hands with kings, and believes the British at least understand your people, even if they don't always respect them. Plus, the Americans seem dangerously hungry for land. Their freedom feels like a future with fences, but not all agree. The Oneida and Tuscarora lean toward the Americans, influenced by long-standing missionary ties and resentment toward British abandonment during earlier colonial conflicts. They believe siding with the rebels might earn goodwill, maybe even security. Maybe is doing a lot of work in that sentence. You sit beside warriors who once hunted together, now glaring across the fire. You see mothers clutching children, terrified of what either path might mean. The Confederacy, once bound by unity, now trembles on the edge of war within war. You ride with a small group to deliver word of alliance to a nearby village. On the way, you pass a burnt field, scorched not by British or rebel hands, but by your own people. Retaliation, betrayal, warning. These aren't just foreign weapons tearing the land. They're the wounds of civil war among nations long allied by blood. You hear stories, too many, of entire communities uprooted. The Battle of Oriskany, you learn, was one of the bloodiest encounters of the entire war, and it wasn't just American versus British. It was brother against brother, Oneida against Mohawk. On that soaked and smoky field, the Iroquois alliance shattered further. The cries of warriors echoed through trees that once marked shared boundaries, now claimed by no one. Meanwhile, American generals issue orders to devastate native villages suspected of supporting the British. Washington, yes, that Washington, green lights. The Sullivan Expedition, which burns crops, razes homes, and turns dozens of Iroquois towns into ash. The Americans call it a military necessity. You call it winter without food. This part doesn't show up on your classroom posters. Historians still argue whether native nations were truly given a fair chance to remain neutral. You're not convinced. It's hard to stay neutral when muskets crack across your border and two empires treat your land like a bargaining chip. In British-held Niagara, refugee camps swell with native families pushed from their homes. Disease runs rampant. Winter bites harder than any soldier's blade. Supplies promised by the crown arrive late, or not at all. You walk among the makeshift tents, handing out what little food you have. Some thank you, some don't look up. You understand both. Yet still, there's resilience. You see traditional songs sung around broken fires, languages passed to young ears even as homes are lost. You watch women replant scorched fields, turning up arrowheads among the roots. A boy plays with a carved wooden hoop, laughing in the ruins of what was once a longhouse. It's not the end of your world, not yet. Some native nations try diplomacy. Others retreat deeper into their own lands, hoping to weather the storm unnoticed. A few make fresh alliances, hedging bets on both sides. But the truth settles like smoke. No matter who wins this revolution, your people will pay the price. You're not the revolution's cause. You're its collateral. And yet, your story is not forgotten. Even if it's not told loudly, Did you know the first treaty signed by the U.S. after the war was with a native nation? The Treaty of Fort Stanwix in 1784, one of many uneasy negotiations meant to settle borders that the settlers never truly respected. You were there. You remember the wary glances, the translated promises, the hidden knives beneath handshakes. There's a myth that native people simply vanished, outmaneuvered by history. You know better. You've survived smallpox, scorched earth, and forced migration, not by vanishing, but by adapting. Even now, as the red and blue coats fade into memory, your songs still echo in the trees, your sovereignty still whispers through the smoke. One day someone will ask who you sided with during the revolution. You'll say, "We sided with survival." You march through Carolina swamps where loyalists and patriots tear neighbors and nerves apart. It's not the elegant war of declarations and parchment anymore. It's mud-soaked boots, rusted bayonets, and the unmistakable sound of musket, fire echoing through moss-draped trees. Welcome to the American South, where the revolution becomes something grittier, more personal, less strategy, more vendetta. You're somewhere in the Carolinas now, and nothing here is simple. You thought this would be about colonists versus redcoats, but that idea dissolves fast in the humidity. Here it's cousin against cousin, merchant against farmer, sometimes even brother against brother. You pass through one village where half the homes fly rebel flags and the other half are scorched ruins. No battlefield in sight, just payback. That's the Southern strategy. See, the British crown shifts focus to the south around 1778. The North is proving tricky. Washington won't go quietly. So British generals like Clinton and Cornwallis pivot, hoping to stir up loyalist support and reclaim the southern colonies piece by piece. They capture Savannah with minimal fuss. Charleston follows in 1780 after a brutal siege. British boots are firmly on southern soil, and yet things don't go smoothly. You're sent on a march through the backcountry, where nothing looks like the maps you were shown. Roads, try winding deer trails clogged with snakes and sharp brush. Cities, mostly, burned out or abandoned. Locals, half of them offer you food and blessings, the other half wait until you pass to shoot you in the back. This is guerrilla warfare now. You meet Francis Marion, the swamp fox. He's short, wiry, and covered in at least 2 layers of grime. He doesn't march in lines or wear fancy uniforms. His men appear from behind cypress trees, strike, then vanish like fog. No one hears them coming. British officers hate him with a passion. He's too unpredictable, too effective, and as one redcoat reportedly grumbled, too fast to catch. You fight in battles that don't make the paintings. Ambushes, raids, skirmishes lasting minutes but costing dozens of lives. You trudge knee-deep through swamps, gnats in your mouth, your gunpowder damp and useless. You learn to sleep with one eye open and one hand on your weapon. If the redcoats don't find you, the alligators might. Loyalist militias are just as vicious as patriot ones. You hear stories, burned churches, massacred prisoners, whole villages wiped out in retaliation for harboring the wrong side. Sometimes you can't tell the difference between patriot and loyalist until they're pointing a gun at your face. You see civilians hanging from trees, a warning from one side to the other, or maybe both. It's not all fighting, though. Sometimes it's just enduring. You remember a week-long march through backwoods Georgia where you had nothing to eat but boiled acorns. A man beside you swears he saw Bigfoot. You laugh, half from hunger, half because down here, anything seems possible. Your socks haven't been dry in months. Your shoes gave up 2 towns ago. At this point, you and the mud are on a first-name basis. Still, the tide turns. The British take Camden in 1780, crushing a large patriot force led by General Gates. You hear about the disaster before the official report even arrives. So many Americans fled. The soldiers joke it was the fastest 10K in revolutionary history. Not exactly the morale booster you were hoping for, but a new commander arrives, Nathaniel Greene. Quaker raised, bookish, not much of a talker, but he knows how to retreat strategically, which, surprisingly, turns out to be very helpful in this mess. He drags British forces deeper and deeper into the Carolinas, stretching their supply lines thin. You call it running. He calls it wearing them down. Tomato, tomato. You participate in the Battle of Cowpens. Yes, it's literally Ao, named after a field for cows. It turns out to be a masterstroke of tactical misdirection. You fake a retreat, draw the British in, then smack them with reinforcements. The British line breaks. You see the whites of their eyes as they realize they've been duped. It's one of the most decisive victories of the Southern campaign. But the war still simmers in the background even when the armies move on. You return to a village that once welcomed you, only to find it burned to the ground. No soldiers in sight, just revenge. Neighbors turning in neighbors. Old debts settled with powder and torch. One man you remember dining with just months ago is now buried in a shallow grave, Loyalist ribbon still pinned to his chest. Historians still argue whether the Southern strategy ever really had a chance. The British hoped the South was full of Loyalist support. They weren't entirely wrong, but they badly misjudged how chaotic things would become when they stirred the pot. And once they lost the countryside, they never really got it back. You sleep one night in an abandoned church. The pews are smashed for firewood, the altar draped with someone's coat. In the flickering firelight, a fellow soldier jokes, "Bet this wasn't what they meant by salvation." You laugh, a little too hard. You haven't heard a hymn in months, and through it all something strange happens. You start to care about this cause again. You came here expecting another campaign, but now you've seen towns fight back with pitchforks. Farmers lay traps in the woods and women poison wells to stop British patrols. This isn't just war anymore. It's something primal, messy, personal. This isn't the revolution you expected. It's not clean. It's not fair. But here, knee-deep in the southern swamps, you understand something new. Winning isn't about glory. It's about grit. You peer into the flickering candlelight as a once hero plots treason for gold and grudges. The room is small, dim, and stifling. A single candle burns low on a crooked table, casting long, twitching shadows across yellowed maps and worn boots. You sit quietly near the wall, trying not to breathe too loudly, because in this very moment, something unthinkable is happening. A name once toasted in taverns and stitched into banners is now whispered in shame. Benedict Arnold. Yes, that Benedict Arnold, the war hero who once led men through freezing woods and fought valiantly at Saratoga. The man who bled for this rebellion is now bargaining to sell it out. And you're watching it unfold like a slow, tragic play where the hero writes his own downfall with every stroke of the pen. Let's rewind. You remember the old Arnold, brash, wounded, determined. He stormed Quebec in 1775 on a miserable winter expedition that chewed up boots and men alike. You were there, barely, half-starved and frostbitten. You saw Arnold press on with fire in his eyes, even as others turned back. Later, at Saratoga, you watched him charge into battle against orders, rallying troops, defying a cowardly superior, and getting his leg nearly blown off for the effort. That leg would ache the rest of his life, a daily reminder of the price he paid for this cause. And what did he get for it? Scorn, politics, accusations. After Saratoga, Congress barely thanked him. Instead, they investigated his expenses, questioned his integrity, and promoted others ahead of him. Meanwhile, lesser men basked in praise, and Arnold, crippled, proud, and broke, stewed in bitterness. So when he was appointed military governor of Philadelphia, he didn't exactly behave like a humble patriot. He lived lavishly, threw grand parties and, scandal of scandals, married Peggy Shippen, the daughter of a known Loyalist family. Cue dramatic music. Was it love? Strategy? A little of both? Historians still argue whether Arnold's descent was masterminded by Peggy or merely accelerated by her. But what's clear is this. Her connections led him to Major John Andre, the British spy master in a powdered wig. And that brings us back to this candlelit room. You watch Arnold unroll secret documents, maps of West Point, an American stronghold he now commands. With a few quiet messages, he offers to hand it over to the British in exchange for money and a general's commission. The price? $20,000, an absolutely bonkers sum at the time, especially for someone supposedly fighting for liberty. You feel a chill, not from the night air, but from the sheer audacity. The same man who once railed against tyranny is now willing to sell out a key fort, a garrison, and maybe even George Washington himself, all for revenge, money, and a warped sense of justice. But fate, as always, has opinions. Major Andre, poor stylish fellow, is caught on his return trip. American militiamen stop him outside Tarrytown. They find the incriminating documents in his boot. Literally, it's the least sneaky place to hide treason. You wonder if he thought boots were exempt from search. The news spreads fast. Andre is arrested and, after a short trial, hanged as a spy. You're there when they bring out the cart and the rope. He stands calm, dignified even, in crisp uniform. Some Americans mourn him, honestly. He was charming, polite, and to be fair, not the mastermind of the plot, just its unlucky delivery man. And where is Arnold? Gone. Fled to the British. Escaped aboard a ship just in time, leaving behind stunned soldiers and a furious Washington, who reportedly muttered that Arnold's name would become infamous in American history. Spoiler alert, it does. From here, Arnold becomes a ghost. You hear whispers of him leading British raids in Virginia and Connecticut, burning villages, looting supplies, always with that same twisted smile. It's like he's trying to burn away the last traces of his old self. You wonder if he sleeps well at night. You doubt it. And here's the thing. It stings more because you liked him. Many did. He was brave, charismatic. He risked his life for this cause more than most ever would. That's what makes it such a gut punch. This isn't just betrayal, it's personal. You watch as soldiers refuse to even speak his name. They call him the traitor, that man, or just spit and say nothing. His former friends burn letters and slash his name from regimental rolls. Congress, in an act of pure historical drama, holds a moment of silence, and then votes to rename everything he ever touched. There's even a monument at Saratoga dedicated to the wounded leg of a nameless general. The plaque honors the bravery, but not the man. It's the only Revolutionary War memorial that literally celebrates a body part instead of a person, a reminder of when he was still one of us. Later, you catch wind of Arnold living in London, unloved, half-respected, never fully trusted even by the British. He tries business, fails, tries farming, fails, dies in 1801, largely forgotten. At his deathbed, they say he wore his old Continental uniform one last time, asking for forgiveness from ghosts that never answered. You sit alone, staring at a map marked with past battles. There's a little coffee stain near West Point. You smirk. Even now, some part of you can't believe it, but the lesson is clear. The revolution wasn't just fought with muskets. It was fought with pride, ego, greed, and wounded honor. Heroes don't always stay heroes. And villains? Sometimes they start out wearing your colors. You slog through thick mud and fog, the chill seeping into your boots as General Burgoyne's grand plan turns soggy, slow, and strangely musical. Welcome to the 1777 Northern Campaign, a British military effort that starts with a brass band and ends with a broken sword. If you're hoping for swift victory, you're in the wrong forest. The plan sounded simple on paper. British General John Burgoyne, a man who travels with more champagne than cannonballs, sets out to cut the rebellious colonies in two by marching from Canada to Albany, New York. He's supposed to meet up with other British forces coming from the south and west, forming a neat little trap. It's a classic divide and conquer strategy, except someone forgot to tell the forests, rivers, patriots, and, well, the other generals. You march alongside Burgoyne's army, a gleaming procession of redcoats, German mercenaries, the Hessians, and even a mobile theater troupe. No joke, this guy brings actors. Historians still argue whether he honestly believed this would be a gentleman's stroll or if he simply had a flair for the dramatic. Either way, you can almost hear the fiddle music playing behind you as the army sets out in high spirits. Then reality kicks in. First, the terrain turns. Nasty. The road from Canada is less a road and more a long, miserable mudslide, peppered with swamps, fallen trees, and surprisingly aggressive mosquitoes. Every step forward requires hacking a path through wilderness so dense, you start to suspect the trees are conspiring against you. Burgoyne's army crawls at a pace so slow that at one point, a turtle gives you a judgmental look and passes on the left. Then come the supply problems. Burgoyne's troops burn through food like teenage boys at a sleepover. You raid local farms, but the locals aren't thrilled. They retaliate with snipers, sabotage, and scorched earth tactics. It's like trying to rob a pantry that's booby-trapped and already empty. Morale begins to dip. Champagne doesn't taste quite as bubbly when your feet are rotting. To make matters worse, the other British commanders never show. General Howe, who was supposed to move north from New York City, decides to take Philadelphia instead, like a tourist who buys tickets to the wrong city. Meanwhile, General Barry St. Ledger's Western force gets tangled up with a fierce resistance led by American militia and Oneida warriors at Fort Stanwix. So Burgoyne, he's on his own, crawling toward Albany like a man running a three-legged race with no partner. Still, you press on. At Bennington, you suffer a brutal blow. Burgoyne sends a detachment to capture supplies, and instead, they stumble into a trap. Local militias, led by the ferociously determined John Stark, wipe them out. It's a small battle, but a massive embarrassment. The hills are swarming with rebels, one officer mutters, and you believe him. You've seen those hills, green, rolling, and filled with people who really, really don't like you. Then, the final stretch, Saratoga. You reach the Hudson River Valley near Saratoga and prepare to dig in. The rebels are ready, and now they've got numbers. General Horatio Gates leads the American army, but most of the action is driven by a fiery-eyed young commander named Benedict Arnold. Yes, that Benedict Arnold. Don't worry, his betrayal comes later. For now, he's still on Team Liberty. Thuisir. First clash, the Battle of Freeman's Farm is a mess of gunfire, smoke, and tangled brush. You can't see more than 20 feet ahead, but you hear the constant crack of muskets and the groans of wounded men. It's unclear who wins. Some say the British hold their ground, others say it's a tactical loss. Either way, it's bloody. You leave the field with fewer friends and a lot more questions. 2 weeks later comes the second battle, Bemis Heights. This time, the Americans strike hard. Arnold, furious at being sidelined by Gates, rides into battle anyway. He charges through the chaos like a man possessed, rallying troops and storming British positions with a wild, brilliant recklessness. You watch him leap his horse over a stump and vanish into the smoke. Moments later, gunfire erupts and cheers rise from rebel lines. He's wounded, but the British are broken. Burgoyne retreats to a hilltop and waits for help that never comes. Supplies are gone, men are sick, spirits are crushed, and finally, under a white flag, Burgoyne surrenders his entire army. You stand in stunned silence as the British stack their muskets and surrender. What was supposed to be a clean victory has turned into one of the worst defeats in British military history. Over 6,000 soldiers are captured. Many will spend the rest of the war in prison camps, some desert. Some never make it home. And across the ocean, in glittering French salons, the news of Saratoga hits like a cannon blast. The Americans have won a real battle. And now, suddenly, France is interested. Diplomats smile. Alliance whispers turn into offers of ships, guns, and maybe, just maybe, a war on Britain from both sides of the sea. But that's a story for another muddy road. You're back at sea now, or more precisely, clutching a splintered rail on a heaving deck, trying not to feed the fish your last meal. The salty spray slaps your face. The wind howls like it has a personal vendetta, and somewhere beneath your soaked boots, the timbers of the ship groan in protest. Welcome to the forgotten front of the revolution, the war at sea. If your mental picture of the American Revolution is all powdered wigs and musket fire and forests, think again. While armies wrestle over redoubt and ridge inland, the Atlantic becomes its own kind of battleground, a chessboard of sails, smoke, and cannonballs, where victory comes in broadsides and burning hulls. Enter the American Navy, or what passes for one in the early days. Spoiler, it's not great. You've got a handful of hastily outfitted merchant vessels, a few privateers, read legal pirates with paperwork, and not much else. Congress can barely agree on lunch, let alone a coherent naval strategy. Still, what the Americans lack in ships, they make up for in pure reckless gall. Take John Paul Jones. He's a Scottish-born sailor with a flair for drama, a taste for revenge, and absolutely no indoor voice. You first spot him pacing the deck of the Bonhomme Richard, his patched-up warship named after Benjamin Franklin's Poor Richard persona. It's not much to look at. In fact, it's kind of a floating death trap. But Jones doesn't care. He's out to make a statement, and he does. In 1779, you find yourself in the North Sea, within spitting distance of the British coast. Yes, the coast. Jones sails straight into enemy waters, itching for a fight. And he gets one, in the form of the British warship Serapis, sleek, well-armed, and commanded by someone who's pretty sure this is going to be a short fight. It's not. The two ships slam together, almost literally. Cannonballs rip through masts and men alike. Smoke blinds you. The decks are slick with seawater, and worse. At one point, the Bonhomme Richard is so torn up that the British demand surrender. Jones famously yells back, "I have not yet begun to fight." Historians still argue whether he really said that or something saltier, but it sure sounds cool. You clutch a line as the ships lock hulls and boarding parties clash. Somehow, impossibly, Jones captures the Serapis. His own ship sinks beneath the waves soon after, but he sails away victorious in the enemy's vessel. It's part pirate tale, part PR miracle. Jones becomes a hero in France, a headache in Britain, and a legend in the colonies. But Jones isn't the only one stirring up trouble on the waves. Across the Atlantic, American privateers swarm like mosquitoes. With letters of marque in hand, legal permission to raid British ships, they capture hundreds of enemy vessels. You board one disguised schooner with mismatched sails and a crew that looks like it walked off a tavern stage. Still, they know how to fight. These raiders bleed Britain's trade dry, choke its supply lines, and turn the Atlantic into a watery minefield of unpredictability. The British Navy, of course, is still the world's most powerful. You feel its wrath blockading American ports, pounding coastal towns, and escorting loyalist refugees. In Charleston, you watch British warships turn the harbor into a trap. In New London, you see homes burn as the redcoats punish resistance, and yet the American Navy gets a strange boost from France. Once the French join the war in 1778, their fleet becomes a game-changer. You stand on the deck of a towering French ship of the line, listening to orders barked in accented English as cannons are loaded and men line up with swords drawn. The French Navy challenges British control of the seas, especially in the Caribbean, where sugar is as valuable as gold and islands change hands like playing cards. In the Battle of the Chesapeake, spoiler alert for a later section, you'll see French ships cut off British resupply to Yorktown, essentially sealing the fate of the war. But even before that, you sense a shift. With every captured convoy, every daring raid, and every humiliating British loss, the message spreads. The Americans aren't just holding on, they're pushing back. Of course, life at sea isn't all heroics. You've got rotten biscuits, sea lice, and the constant risk of scurvy. Eat your citrus, seriously. Discipline is brutal. You once saw a sailor flogged just for stealing rum. And forget personal space. Hammocks sway inches apart in a stinking candlelit hull that could flood at any moment. Still, in the candlelit journals of these sailors, in scratched carvings on deck planks, you find a strange kind of hope. They believe they're fighting for something big, something worth braving storms and shrapnel. Liberty, they call it. Even if they have to cross an ocean to get it. You're back on dry land now, or as dry as a campfire-warmed battlefield gets. And tonight, your journey takes a quieter, smokier turn. No cannon blasts here, no cavalry charges. Just the soft clink of pots, the scratch of quills, the whispered lullabies behind canvas walls. You walk not among generals, but the women who fought the American Revolution in 100 quiet, vital ways. Let's get one thing straight. This war is not just a man's game. You start to notice it early, long before the shooting starts. Women are already there, behind counters, sewing circles and printing presses, rallying for boycotts, mocking loyalist tea drinkers, and writing pamphlets that make grown men squirm. Mercy Otis Warren's pen slices sharper than any bayonet, and you spot her stirring up sedition in poetic verse while her brothers load muskets. But once the war explodes, women's roles shift into overdrive. You meet them at camp, stooped over kettles and cloth, cooking for entire regiments while keeping one wary eye on their children and another on the enemy. They're the camp followers, a clunky term for wives, sisters, and daughters who follow soldiers to the front because, honestly, staying behind often isn't safer. There's Mary Ludwig Hayes, better known as Molly Pitcher, hauling water through hails of musket fire during the Battle of Monmouth. Some say she even took over her husband's cannon when he collapsed. Historians still argue whether Molly was one woman or many rolled into one legend, but you can almost feel the splash of her bucket, the searing heat of that cannon barrel, and the silent message in her eyes. Move, I've got this. And there's Deborah Sampson, who takes things even further. You duck behind a hedge as she marches past in full continental uniform, her chest bound tight, her hair cut short, her secret guarded. She fights for over a year as Robert Shirtliff and even performs minor surgery on herself to keep her identity hidden. When she's finally found out, instead of jail time, she gets a pension and eventually, applause. You might catch a glance of Agent 355, a mysterious woman from the Culper spy ring who risks everything to funnel secrets from British high society back to General Washington. Her identity is still a matter of speculation, but her impact is undeniable. No one ever suspects the seamstress, until they do. Meanwhile, back home, the war transforms daily life. Farms don't plow themselves, and businesses don't pause just because the men go off to war. You meet women running shops, hammering out nails in blacksmith forges, and hauling harvest through redcoat patrol zones. One joke going around is, If we don't win this war soon, the ladies will decide they don't need us back at all. You laugh, nervously. And let's not forget the printers. In cities like Boston and Philadelphia, you smell the hot ink and paper as women like Mary Goddard run presses that spread news of the revolution. Goddard even prints the first official copy of the Declaration of Independence with all the names. All of them. That's a pretty dangerous move in 1776. You glance at the bold font and realize she knew exactly what she was doing. At the same time, grief and sacrifice cling to these stories like morning mist. You visit homes draped in black ribbon, where widows rock silently by cold hearths, tracing letters that never should have had to be written. You hear the names of women, Cato, Selem, Phyllis, who are enslaved, helping the cause for a freedom they're still denied. You catch one woman hiding rebel fighters under her floorboards and another turning in her own son for siding with the British. This war is messy, and the women? They live every contradiction of it. Take the loyalist women. Not everyone supports the revolution, and many loyalist women find themselves exiled, attacked, or silenced. You watch one plead for her confiscated property in front of a colonial court. She's ignored. Her crime? Her husband wore red. Doesn't matter that she baked bread for both sides. Revolution, you realize, can be harshest to those stuck in the middle. You spend one night beside a fire, listening to soldiers thank their ladies for mending uniforms, for slipping extra rations into knapsacks, for hiding letters inside petticoats. And then you realize those aren't just nice stories, they're survival strategies. This revolution doesn't work without them. And here's the kicker. After the war ends, most of these women go right back to being invisible. No medals, no monuments, no parades, maybe a pension if they're lucky, maybe a street named after their husband. But you remember. You remember the hands that stitched flags and loaded muskets, the lullabies turned into battle cries, the boots worn thin by miles of marching after dreams not their own. And on nights like this, when you close your eyes to the crackle of a campfire and a wind that smells like smoke and sweat, and something fiercely alive, you know the truth. They fought too, just in quieter voices. You're standing shoulder to shoulder with men whose uniforms don't quite fit. Their coats are often second-hand, their boots barely hold together, and their skin, black, brown, freckled, scarred, tells a story many history books forget. Tonight, you're among the black patriots of the American Revolution, and things aren't as simple as freedom for all. Let's rewind to a bitter truth. In 1775, when the first shots ring out at Lexington and Concord, slavery is legal in all 13 colonies. Every single one. Enslaved people work in fields, homes, and workshops, building the very economy the colonists claim the British are oppressing. So when you hear white men shouting about liberty and tyranny, it's complicated, but from the start, black Americans, both enslaved and free, are drawn into the revolution. Some fight because they believe in its ideals. Others fight because it's a way out. And some are simply dragged in by the tides of war. Here comes the twist. It's actually the British who first promised freedom to enslaved people. In November 1775, Lord Dunmore, the royal governor of Virginia, issues a proclamation offering liberty to any enslaved man who joins the British forces. You imagine hearing those words whispered across plantations at night, passed between rows of crops under moonlight. For many, this is the first real chance at escape. So they run. You join one such man, barefoot, breath ragged, heart pounding, as he slips past the edge of a tobacco field toward a British encampment. He doesn't know if the promise is real, but it's more than what he's been given so far. Thousands of men, women, and children follow this path, forming what's known as Lord Dunmore's Ethiopian Regiment. They stitch liberty to slaves onto their sashes, a bitter and bold declaration, and fight with fire in their eyes. But life in British service isn't paradise. Many are worked to exhaustion, struck with disease, or betrayed when it suits the Crown's interests. You witness more than one being shipped off to sugar plantations in the Caribbean, free in name only. The Americans, meanwhile, aren't exactly consistent. Early on, Washington forbids the enlistment of black soldiers in the Continental Army. But desperation changes minds. As the war drags on and bodies become scarce, policies bend. Suddenly, black men are allowed, often quietly, often grudgingly, to join. Some are offered freedom in return for service, some are promised land, others are simply used. You meet men like Peter Salem, a formerly enslaved man who fights bravely at Bunker Hill. Later, at Saratoga, you catch a glimpse of Prince Whipple rowing Washington across the Delaware in that famous painting, though whether he actually did is one of those things historians still argue about. Then there's James Armistead Lafayette. You crouch beside him as he eavesdrops on British officers, gathering intel as a double agent. His inside knowledge helps trap Cornwallis at Yorktown. He's a spy, a hero, and still enslaved until years after the war. When he finally receives his freedom, it's only because the Marquis de Lafayette writes a personal letter on his behalf. Liberty, it seems, often requires connections. And then there's the 1st Rhode Island Regiment, nicknamed the Black Regiment, an integrated unit where black and native men fight side by side. You march beside them through mud and gunpowder, noting how they're often sent to the front lines. A coincidence? You don't think so. You also see how the war divides black communities. Some align with the Patriots, others with the British, weighing their options in a world that offers little either way. For many, the question isn't which side will win, but which side might keep its promises. After Yorktown, the question becomes even more urgent. You watch as black veterans return home only to find their land grants revoked, their freedom denied, or their lives still trapped in poverty. Some are re-enslaved. Others are kidnapped and sold. The promises of the war, spoken with so much passion, begin to rot in the sunlight. Still, some carve out places for themselves. You visit communities of free black people forming in cities like Philadelphia and Boston. You hear church bells ring for newly founded black congregations, schools, and aid societies. The revolution has opened doors. Not all and not wide, but just enough for a few to slip through. In the end, you sit quietly with an old black veteran. His hair is silver, his back bent, but his eyes are clear. He tells you he fought for a country that didn't quite exist yet. Not on paper, not in practice. He says he fought because he believed it might someday. And that belief, that fragile, burning hope, might be the most revolutionary thing of all. You dig alongside other soldiers, your hands blistered and caked in red Virginia clay. Overhead, French cannon crews are locking in their targets, and across the river the British are trapped, their backs pressed to the York River. You're in the final act now, the siege of Yorktown. The trap is set. This is where it all might end. It's October 1781, and after years of marching, losing, winning, and endlessly freezing, the Continental Army finally has something it's rarely had: momentum, and critically help, French help. You hear the snare drums first, steady, dignified, and then see the tricolor flag snapping in the autumn wind. The French have arrived in force, not just ships and officers this time, but thousands of actual troops, commanded by the elegant but surprisingly muddy Marquis de Lafayette and the older, no-nonsense General Rochambeau. They've marched hundreds of miles south to join up with Washington. Their boots are cleaner than yours, for now. Washington himself is here too, of course. You catch him on horseback, scanning the horizon with that calm, steel gaze. You wonder if he knows this could be it, the battle that finally ends, the war. Or maybe he's just thinking about how much longer his horse feed will last. Hard to say with George. The plan is bold and risky. Washington and Rochambeau march their combined forces south from New York, leaving the Northern Theater vulnerable. Admiral de Grasse, commanding the French fleet, blocks the Chesapeake Bay, cutting off the British by sea. Cornwallis, the British general stationed in Yorktown, has no idea the full storm that's about to hit. You step into a shallow trench and hear the whispering spread. The noose is tightening. Night falls, and the digging continues. You and hundreds of others scrape out long, zigzagging earthworks under the cover of darkness, slowly inching toward British lines. Every now and then, a musket ball whistles overhead. One nearly takes off your hat. You try to laugh it off, but your heart won't stop hammering. This is siege warfare. Slow, exhausting, psychological. You build parallels, each trench drawing you closer to the enemy. You sleep little. You eat less. You're filthy, tired, and oddly hopeful. The French cannon finally open fire. The sound is less a bang and more a soul-rattling thump that shakes the air. You watch red-hot shot arc across the sky like comets and crash into British fortifications with terrifying precision. You can smell the scorched wood. You can hear the shouted commands, the chaos. You wonder how long Cornwallis can hold out. One night, you're assigned to storm Redoubt 10, one of the key British defensive positions. You crouch in the darkness, bayonet fixed, waiting for the signal. No muskets are loaded. It's a silent assault. You'll be relying on speed, surprise, and cold steel. The whistle blows. You charge forward, shouting, stumbling, vaulting over sharpened stakes. A British soldier lunges, and you duck just in time. The fighting is brutal, but brief. In under 30 minutes, the redoubt is yours. You raise a battered Continental flag and cheer, breathless. Redoubt 9 falls to the French at the same time. The trap is now complete. Cornwallis realizes it's over. There's no escape, no reinforcements, no clever British maneuver left to pull. His troops are starving, his men are deserting. His ships are at the bottom of the bay or captured, and so, on October 19, 1781, under gray skies and with the scent of gunpowder still thick in the air, the British surrender. You stand silently as lines of redcoats march out of Yorktown, drums beating a slow tune that some say is called "The World Turned Upside Down." But historians still argue whether that's actually true. It might just be a poetic flourish that's stuck in the collective imagination. Either way, it fits. Cornwallis refuses to attend the ceremony. He claims he's sick. He sends his second-in-command, who tries to surrender to Rochambeau. The Frenchman politely declines. The British officer then turns to Washington, who also declines. Finally, the sword is handed to General Benjamin Lincoln, an ironic callback to the American general forced to surrender earlier in the war. You raise an eyebrow at the drama. Petty? Maybe. Symbolic? Absolutely. As the British lay down their arms, stacking muskets in orderly lines, you realize something profound. This might actually be the end. After 6 grueling years, your world, the one filled with whispers of rebellion, icy marches, and too many funerals, might finally tilt toward peace, but your celebration is cautious. You've heard this before. And besides, the treaty hasn't been signed yet. Still, that night around the campfires, there's music. There's laughter. Someone even has a bottle of something suspiciously French and fizzy. And for the first time in a long time, the stars above seem to blink with something like peace. You crouch low behind a half-finished trench, damp earth caking your fingers, the sharp tang of gunpowder hanging in the morning mist. Your ears still ring from the overnight cannonade. The French batteries opened fire at dusk and haven't let up since. You can hardly believe it. The moment everyone's whispered about for years is finally here. Yorktown. The trap is set. And this time, it's the British who are stuck. You glance over your shoulder. The Marquis de Lafayette, with his impossibly neat uniform and windswept curls, is issuing orders in his half-French, half-patriot English. Not far from him stands Washington, taller than you'd imagined, his expression fixed somewhere between grim exhaustion and quiet resolve. The Continental Army and French allies are working in strange harmony, and it feels, dare you think it, like this might actually work. Cornwallis doesn't know it yet, but he's cornered. It's October 1781, and he's camped near the York River with over 7,000 redcoats. You've been building trenches by moonlight, dragging artillery into position, and dodging musket fire for days. French warships now block the Chesapeake Bay, and the only British hope of rescue is a navy that's fashionably late. You pause to wipe sweat from your brow. All around, the siege tightens like a noose. Every morning brings a new scar to the British. Fortifications carved out by cannonballs and determination. This isn't just another battle, it's the grand finale, whether Cornwallis likes it or not. You remember the rumors flying months ago. Cornwallis was chasing rebels through the Carolinas, then suddenly holed up in a sleepy Virginia port town. Historians still argue whether it was arrogance, bad intelligence, or pure desperation that led him here. Whatever the reason, Washington seized the opportunity like a gambler going all in. You were part of the forced march south, over 400 miles, in just over a month. Most of it was mud, blisters, and prayers. But when you arrived and saw the French fleet already in position, that's when the air changed. That's when it started to feel real. Now you wince as a cannon thunders to your left, sending shudders through the soil. A French engineer waves his arms wildly, shouting about parallels and sappers. You have no idea what he's saying, but you keep digging. This siege isn't about heroics. It's about patience. Exhaust the enemy. Break their walls. Break their spirit. You've heard whispers about Cornwallis's mindset. He's barricaded in his quarters, writing panicked letters to General Clinton in New York. But Clinton's fleet is still on its way, which feels about as comforting as a bayonet hug. Meanwhile, the British soldiers trapped with him are starving, sick, and weary. Their supplies dwindle by the day. Somehow, through all this mud and chaos, there's a rhythm. Cannon. Dig, sleep, repeat. One night you hear laughter coming from a nearby fire, French and American soldiers swapping wine and bad translations. It hits you. These aren't just allies, they're friends. The revolution pulled together people from across oceans, different tongues and customs, all converging here with one goal: to end the British rule over these colonies once and for all. Then comes the order: prepare for assault. You line up, heart-hammering, muskets at the ready. The trenches you've been carving snake dangerously close to the British lines now, closer than comfort allows. The next push might be the final one. On October 14th, you go over the top. You and your comrades rush through the night toward Redoubt Jagerten, a key defensive position. Bayonets glint under starlight. You trip, fall, scramble. Again. Shots rip through the darkness. You can't hear anything over the roar, but your side takes it. Redoubt secured. The noose tightens further. By now, Cornwallis must feel it closing in. His troops have been digging graves as quickly as they've been patching walls. You hear that he's tried to escape across the river, but a storm thwarted the attempt. Bad luck or poetic justice? Hard to say. Either way, he's stuck. On October 17th, a white flag rises. You freeze. Could it be real? You watch from a distance as British officers, stiff as boards, walk out beneath a white cloth, surrender terms clenched in their fists. 2 days later, Cornwallis's army lines up to the mournful tune of "The World Turned Upside Down." You watch jaw slack as their muskets and flags are stacked in silence. Cornwallis himself? He sends his second-in-command to surrender in his place, claiming illness. Though many suspect it's just a bruised ego, still you don't cheer. Not yet. There's a weight in the air that celebration can't lift. This war has taken too many. You look around at friends missing limbs, others missing entirely. Your boots are soaked, your hands blistered, but your soul? For the first time, there's a glimmer of peace. A quirky little side note: the French insisted on a theatrical flourish during the surrender, making sure their troops stood opposite the British, basking in the poetic revenge for centuries of rivalry. You're just glad the whole thing didn't collapse into one final ego-fueled brawl. And as for Washington, he remains composed, accepting the British surrender with the same stern dignity he's carried since Boston. No gloating, no speeches. Just a nod and a glance that seems to say, "We did what we had to do." Later that night, you sit by a fire, chewing something vaguely stew-like. Someone passes a bottle. You don't even ask what's in it. You look up at the stars and exhale. You're still here. You made it. Is it really over? Maybe not quite. But tonight, you let yourself believe. You wake to birdsong and the muffled hum of French voices packing up their camp. The guns have gone quiet. For once, no one is shouting. No one is firing. Just the sounds of men exhaling after years of breath held too tight. The battle at Yorktown is over, but the world hasn't exactly thrown a parade just yet. You pull on your worn coat, noticing the fabric's thinner than you remember. Or maybe you're just feeling everything more sharply now. Word of the surrender spreads like wildfire. It ripples across the colonies, carried by horse, ship, and sheer disbelief. In Philadelphia, they ring the bells all day. In Boston, crowds swarm the streets, toasting and weeping like they've all just survived the same fever dream. But in London, the reaction is complicated. You picture it. Parliament packed to the rafters, powdered wigs bobbing like anxious sheep. A messenger bursts in, breathless, handing off the sealed report. A heavy silence falls. Then comes the groan, long and low, like a ship's hull cracking under strain. Cornwallis, their golden boy, has surrendered to a bunch of barely trained rebels and a French aristocrat with impeccable hair. The sheer embarrassment is enough to send monocles flying. Some members of Parliament call for a renewed campaign. Others, more grounded or maybe just more tired, know the truth. The British public is sick of this war. They've been footing the bill, burying sons, and watching their empire stumble on foreign soil. Historians still argue whether Yorktown alone ended the war, but most agree it broke Britain's will to keep fighting. Back across the Atlantic, you keep your musket nearby. The war might be functionally over, but peace is still a fantasy scribbled on parchment somewhere. The British still hold New York, Charleston too. Until a formal treaty is signed, you stay ready, because that's what you've learned to do. Meanwhile, the Continental Congress starts behaving like a group that might actually win something. You see more letters with wax seals, more committees, Meeting late into the night. Diplomats are already on ships headed for Europe. Franklin is somewhere in Paris, charming ladies twice his age, and outmaneuvering men half his wit. But here's the part no one likes to talk about. Peace takes forever. You'd think after 8 years of war, someone would slap ink on a treaty and call it a day. Instead, it becomes a long, drawn-out diplomatic waltz. The French want territory. The Spanish have opinions. The Dutch are just happy to be invited. And you? You wait. You patrol muddy roads near villages that no longer remember which side they were on. You stop bandits, some wearing red, some wearing blue. Most just hungry. The lines between patriot and profiteer blur quickly when the shooting stops. Then, one quiet evening, you overhear something in town. The British Parliament has voted to end offensive operations. No more invasions. No more chasing rebels through swamps. Your heart skips. It's not a treaty, but it's close enough to hope. By late 1782, negotiations in Paris finally gather steam. You picture the rooms. Heavy velvet curtains, maps with curling edges, and old men arguing over imaginary lines. Franklin plays chess with diplomacy. John Adams fumes in a corner. And John Jay insists on full independence, no compromises. It's almost funny. The men risking frostbite in the field have little say, while the fate of a continent gets hashed out over brandy and stubborn pride. But that's how empires crumble. Paper by paper, not just bullet by bullet. In April 1783, word finally arrives, a preliminary peace agreement. The British Crown will recognize American independence. The official treaty, the Treaty of Paris, is signed months later in September. You don't see a copy, of course. Just hear it from a traveling preacher who reads part of it aloud at a crossroads like it's divine scripture. You feel something shift inside. You're no longer a rebel. You're something else now. Free? Maybe. But free to do what? To go where? The quirky thing about this moment is how anticlimactic it feels. No grand ceremonies, no fireworks, just a subtle tilt in the world's axis. The war ends not with a bang, but with a deeply negotiated sigh. Back in London, reactions are mixed. Some politicians mutter about colonial incompetence. Others say it was inevitable. A few suggest quietly that maybe this independence thing will work. Most just hope France doesn't get too smug. As you sit on a fence post watching a British supply wagon roll by, its guards glancing nervously at every tree, you realize they're leaving. One by one, redcoats are packing up. Not all and not fast, but the tide is clearly going out. New York will be the last stronghold, and even that won't hold for much longer. You pass a tavern where someone's playing a fiddle tune that sounds almost like Yankee Doodle. Kids are chasing chickens down the street, and somewhere someone is trying to sell a dented musket as a piece of history. Life, stubborn as ever, lurches forward. There's still so much unresolved. Slavery hasn't gone anywhere. Women still aren't allowed in most of the rooms where decisions get made. And native nations, the ones who picked the wrong side or simply tried to stay out of it, are watching their lands vanish in slow motion. But tonight, you exhale. You lean against a porch post, listening to the cicadas, wondering what your life might be if it didn't revolve around bayonets and ration lines. The stars feel closer now. Or maybe you're just finally still enough to see them clearly. You run your hand along the weathered fence outside a farmhouse where no one lives anymore. The shutters hang crooked. Smoke stains climb the stone chimney. The war is over, yes, but the silence it leaves behind is far from peaceful. You're beginning to see it everywhere. Towns half full, fields gone wild with weeds, homes abandoned by loyalists who fled in the wake of surrender. You thought the end of fighting would bring joy. Instead, it brings something harder to name. It's the revenge and the remnants. You walk into a town you once passed through years ago, when it was flying British colors and folks eyed you warily. Now the flags are different, but the glances haven't changed much. Tensions still crackle in the air like an old musket primed to misfire. A new question has replaced all the old ones. Who was on which side? Loyalists, those who stayed true to the crown, aren't faring well. Many flee under cover of night, wagons piled high with what they can carry. Some head for Canada, others for Britain, even the Caribbean. You pass one such caravan in the muddy road. Children peek out from under canvas covers. A woman clutches a teapot wrapped in cloth like it's a relic. They don't look like traitors. They just look tired. Back in the towns, former neighbors settle old scores. Land gets reclaimed, sometimes violently. There are public shaming rituals. Tar, feathers, and worse, though thankfully less often now. You hear of loyalist homes burned to the ground in Pennsylvania. One man in Georgia is stripped of everything, including his shoes, for daring to keep a portrait of King George above his fireplace. Historians still argue whether the treatment of loyalists was justice or vengeance. You're not sure either. Some fought against the revolution, others just tried to keep their heads down. It's blurry. Most things are, once the smoke clears. Meanwhile, patriots return home, those lucky enough to have homes left. You hear of soldiers coming back to find their wives remarried, their farms claimed by others, their children too young to remember their faces. Some laugh it off, others don't. There's no manual for what happens after war, only 1,000 tiny reckonings. You visit an old friend who fought beside you at Saratoga. He's missing 2 fingers and half a tooth, but still manages a crooked smile. He invites you in for soup. His barn is gone and his crop won't yield this year. Still, he shrugs, I guess we won, huh? You smile, but don't answer. In cities like Boston and New York, there's an air of frantic reconstruction. New governments spring up like weeds. Committee after committee deciding who owns what, who governs whom, and what exactly a free republic is supposed to look like. Some loyalists try to blend in, to pretend they were always just moderates. Others are too well known, too stained. Trials begin, but they're more theater than justice. The guilty are often punished before the gavel falls. A quirky footnote: in some areas, local militias actually refused to stop fighting. They hunted down loyalist bands, stormed settlements, and stoked skirmishes well into the months after Yorktown. The war may have ended on paper, but in the hills and valleys, some folks just didn't get the memo. You head south, curious to see how the Carolinas are coping. It's bleak. The Civil War within the Revolution cut deepest here. Brother against brother, literal in many cases. You meet a woman in Charleston who lost both her sons, one to the British, one to the Americans. She keeps both uniforms folded in the same cedar chest. They believed different things, she says, pouring tea, but I held them the same. As you travel, you notice how much of the revolution was really personal. You'd been trained to think of it in red versus blue, loyalist versus patriot, but now you see the layers. The neighbor who joined the redcoats because the rebels burned his mill. The black soldier promised freedom, then re-enslaved by the man he fought beside. The native scouts abandoned when their allies claimed victory. And yet, life crawls back. Markets reopen. Fences are mended. Churches ring bells again cautiously. People remarry. Plant seeds. Try to pretend they've forgotten. Some folks even make jokes again, though mostly the awkward, too soon kind. You find work helping rebuild a homestead for a widow whose husband died at Monmouth. Her young son follows you around, asking endless questions about the war. You dodge, most of them. But one afternoon he asks, "Did the good guys win?" And you pause. "Well," you say slowly, "some of them did." The boy frowns, confused. Then he runs off chasing a chicken. One night, around a fire with old comrades, someone mentions the word healing. It hangs in the air for a while, like wood smoke. Maybe that's what comes next. Not celebration, not even peace, just healing. With time and luck and a little less shouting. You learn that some loyalists who fled return later, begging for mercy. A few are granted it, especially if they have skills the town needs. Doctors, blacksmiths, schoolmasters. Some get their land back. Others find someone else living on it. Still, not all stories end badly. You meet a former loyalist and a patriot, running a store together, splitting profits and pretending not to argue. You eat at a tavern built on land once seized in the name of liberty, now serving both revolutionaries and redcoat deserters. The world isn't black and white anymore, if it ever was. And as winter approaches, you sit on a worn porch in a town that survived the war, if just barely. Kids play in the dirt, their laughter echoing off buildings patched with mismatched bricks. Someone's playing a fiddle. No one talks about politics. You close your eyes. It's not perfect, not even close. But it's a start. You're leaning on a windowsill in a crowded port town, watching ships sway in the harbor. Some are merchant vessels, some fly foreign flags, and one, just docking, carries a name you recognize. Not because it's famous, but because it's been making the same transatlantic trek for months now. It's a diplomatic vessel. It's carrying the real victory, a piece of paper that makes all of this official. The Treaty of Paris has arrived, but not quickly. You watch with a sigh as crates get hoisted by rope, sailors shout in 3 different languages, and a dog with no owner wanders the dock like it belongs there. Everything feels tired, like even the city can't be bothered to celebrate properly. After all, the fighting stopped back in '81. This is just the slow, clumsy paperwork part. You're not alone in thinking it took too long. Most folks expected a treaty to be signed quickly after Yorktown. Instead, it dragged on for nearly 2 years. The British weren't keen to give up too much. The Americans insisted on full independence. The French and Spanish had their own agendas, and Franklin, Adams, and Jay had to navigate all of it, without cell phones, Starbucks, or any patience left. Historians still argue whether the treaty's delay helped or hurt. Some say it gave everyone time to cool off. Others believe the gap allowed chaos to fester. Land grabs, revenge killings, and rampant inflation. You see both sides, honestly. You wander past a coffee house where word is spreading. The treaty is done. Signed. Ratified. Sealed. On September 3rd, 1783, the ink dried. King George III officially recognized the United States of America. Cue the fireworks, or at least some really aggressive tea drinking. What's quirky is how ordinary the treaty's arrival feels. A rider shows up, dismounts, and casually delivers it to the local printer like he's bringing in the lunch menu. No cannon fire, no parades, just a deep breath and a creased packet of vellum. You skim a copy nailed to the town hall. The words are stiff, diplomatic, even polite. You can almost hear the sighs between the lines. Britain agrees to vacate American territory with all convenient speed. That vague phrase will haunt many a commander. You know for a fact there are still redcoats holed up in New York City, and they're not exactly packing in a hurry. You turn your attention to Article I-7. Property of loyalists should be restored. You stifle a laugh. Try telling that to the angry mob down the road who just repainted the old loyalist mayor's house in pig's blood. Then there's the fishing rights. The stuff nobody except New Englanders and maritime nerds seem to care about. But it matters. You hear sailors arguing over cod routes near Newfoundland like they're talking about buried treasure. Turns out, sovereignty tastes a lot like salted fish. Meanwhile, the British begin their slow, sometimes reluctant evacuation. One garrison leaves Boston quietly under cover of fog. Another surrenders its fort with a ceremonial fife band playing what sounds suspiciously like a funeral march. You witness one final awkward handshake between a British officer and an American militia captain, neither meeting the other's eye. No one wants to be the last one here, but someone always is. In New York, it gets weird. The city remains a loyalist stronghold long after the treaty. When British troops finally depart in late November 1783, it's treated like a second Independence Day. You hear about George Washington marching in as crowds cheer and bells ring. The taverns run out of ale. People cry. Someone swears they saw a bald eagle perched on a lamppost. But here's what the treaty doesn't resolve. Thousands of black loyalists, freed slaves who fought for the British in exchange for liberty, are left behind in the margins. Some are relocated to Nova Scotia. Others, heartbreakingly, are re-enslaved by former owners who claim them as property. You help one such man escape through the woods near the border, guiding him with whispered directions and the knowledge that some promises don't survive the peace. You also hear rumblings on the frontier. The treaty ignores Native American nations entirely. Their lands, huge sacred stretches of forest and plain, are now American according to the map, but no one asked the people living there. You imagine how that must feel, not just conquered but erased. Still, for many, this is a moment of rare clarity, a clean slate, a fresh start. You see families repainting their homes, couples marrying in old churches with broken windows, veterans starting farms or shops. Even tavern songs shift, from wartime ballads to clumsy anthems about liberty, justice, and sometimes goats. In one city, you attend a treaty celebration that spills into the street. A band plays a cobbled-together version of "My Country and 'Tis of Thee." Only half the words exist yet. A boy waves a flag he clearly drew himself. 13 stars in a slightly drunk-looking circle. Everyone claps anyway. Franklin finally returns home, plumper and more famous than ever. Adams and Jay don't get the same fanfare, but insiders know the truth. All three helped carve out a place for this scrappy new country in a room full of empires. You helped deliver a stack of treaty pamphlets to a schoolhouse. The teacher, a stern woman with spectacles and chalk-stained fingers, nods and sets one on her desk. "Time to start teaching something real," she says. You grin. You've lived it. Every cold march, every sour ration, every musket misfire, and now it's history. The funny thing is, the treaty only looks like the end. You know better. It's more like a pause, a prologue, a to be continued. The real challenge hasn't even started yet, because building a country from scratch, that's a whole different war. You walk down a dirt road that didn't exist 5 years ago. Trees have been cleared, the soil turned, and fences rise in crooked lines to mark ownership. Every few miles you pass a house in some state of almost finished stone, stacked, logs notched, chimneys still smoking with newness. These aren't battlefields. They're something rarer. They're the beginnings of what people hope can be normal again. The soldiers are coming home, or at least, the ones who can. You fall in step with a few of them, men you recognize from the lines at Brandywine or the frosty trenches of Valley Forge. Some wear what's left of their uniforms. Others have swapped them for patched trousers and sun-faded shirts. Most carry everything they own in a knapsack or a bundle slung over their backs. One guy jokes that the war gave him bad knees, a suspicious cough, and a lifelong fear of soup that smells like boiled shoes. Everyone laughs, but it's a short laugh, because for all their sacrifices, these returning troops aren't greeted with parades or pensions. They're handed a handshake, maybe a meal, and a thank you with all the weight of a dry leaf in the wind. There's no national army anymore. Congress disbanded most of it almost as soon as the ink dried on the treaty. Too expensive, they said. Too dangerous, too. After all, didn't America just fight a war against a standing army? So you return home, or somewhere like home, and find the world has moved on. Some veterans become local heroes. Others, especially, those with visible wounds or short tempers, are quietly avoided. A few take to drink. One opens a school. Another starts a printing press. The rest just try to survive. You walk past a field once used for musket practice. It's wheat now, and beyond it stands a house with a widow on the porch. Her husband never made it back. You tip your hat. She nods. Neither of you says what you're thinking. He died for this. You hear stories that make you grit your teeth. Land grants promised to soldiers suddenly vanish under legal loopholes or political favors. In some states, officers are rewarded, but enlisted men are told to be content with the honor of serving. One guy you know, he lost 3 toes at Monmouth, is living in a barn with his family. He gets by trading firewood and fixing wagons. Historians still argue whether Congress truly failed the veterans or just didn't have the means to help. Either way, you know how it feels on the ground, like being forgotten, and yet some find purpose. Militias become more formal in some towns. You help train young men who never fought but now want to preserve liberty. It's a strange twist. You fought to end one military presence, and now you're part of another forming. You also notice a divide creeping in. Officers tend to do better than the average soldier. They have connections, land, education. A few even slip into politics. You see some start referring to themselves as gentlemen more often than comrades. That stings. One afternoon in a tavern full of veterans, someone slaps a newspaper on the table. It lists names of men who didn't serve, but now hold public office, own large estates, or import French furniture. The room goes quiet. Then someone mutters, "We bled. They banked." You nod. Still, you keep marching forward in your own way. You help a neighbor rebuild a barn. You break up a fight in a market over a sack of flour. You teach a boy how to load a musket, not for war, but for hunting. Slowly, you begin to believe that maybe, this new country might be worth the mess it left in its wake. There are some brighter spots. You hear about soldiers in Massachusetts forming a group to petition for their pay. Together. Not with weapons, but with words. It's rough going, but it's something. You wonder if it's a sign of the next revolution. Not one of muskets, but of mouths. A quirky footnote. Some veterans try to get their back pay by showing up at Congress in person, wearing their threadbare uniforms and rattling empty coin purses. One guy brings a musket just for effect. Congress predictably pretends not to see them. You meet an older man, white hair tied back, who fought in the French and Indian War before this one. He sits by a pond, fishing with a bent pin and a length of twine. You never come back the same, he says, not looking at you. You leave pieces of yourself out there, in the mud, in the friends you lost. You just hope enough comes home to build something new. You never asked his name. You probably won't forget it anyway. As seasons shift, you notice something unexpected. Veterans are starting to form little communities, not just towns, but identities. They write to each other, meet when they can, swap stories, argue about who shot first at Bunker Hill. Still a debate, still hilarious. Some of them, even the ones who limped home with nothing, say they'd do it all again. You believe them. One cold morning, you pass by a parade ground where school children are, rehearsing a pageant about the revolution. They wave wooden swords and yell "Huzzah" too loud. A boy with a tricorn hat salutes you. You salute back. And just like that, you're part of the memory now, part of the myth. But you remember what it was really like. The noise, the hunger, the endless walking, the rain, the blood, the ridiculous songs sung off-key around smoky fires. You carry that truth with you because someone has to. Because someday someone will ask, what did it feel like? And when they do, you'll know how to answer. Not with glory or grandeur, but with the simple truth. We fought. We came home. We kept going. You sit on a rickety bench inside a hot, crowded hall. It smells faintly of sweat, ink, and the desperation of men trying to invent something that's never existed. All around you, voices argue over words, over commas, over what freedom actually means. Welcome to the lab where they're building the new republic, one exhausting compromise at a time. The revolution's over, but the real work has just begun. It's 1787. You've drifted here from farm towns and faded battlefields, from taverns where rumors buzz louder than flies. What you see now is the Constitutional Convention, and it's not going smoothly, because trying to stitch 13 squabbling states into one functional country is like teaching cats to form a marching band in matching uniforms while on fire. You glance around the room and catch glimpses of the legends. There's George Washington at the head, silent, statue still, commanding the room just by existing. James Madison, hunched over notes like he's trying to write the next Bible. Alexander Hamilton, pacing like caffeine runs through his veins instead of blood. Ben Franklin, looking equal parts brilliant and completely over it. But here's the thing they don't want you to notice. Everyone's nervous. This isn't just theory anymore, it's survival. The Articles of Confederation, the country's first attempt at government, have been a mess. No power to tax, no executive branch, states acting like mini-nations with their own currencies, and militias. It's like a group project where no one does their part, and the deadline was last year. Historians still argue whether the Articles failed because they were too weak or because Americans never gave them a fair shot. Either way, nobody's clamoring to keep them around, so now they're writing something new, something more permanent. And you're part of the curious crowd watching the birth of a government, one compromise, one eye roll, and one shouting match at a time. You hear a fierce debate over representation. The big states want more votes. The small states say not so fast. The result? The Great Compromise, a bicameral legislature. That's two chambers. The Senate gives each state equal footing. The House gives power based on population. Everyone's a little annoyed, which means it might actually work. Then comes the elephant in the room, slavery. You feel the temperature shift every time it's mentioned. The southern states want slaves counted for representation but not for taxes. The northern states want the opposite. So, in one of the most morally tangled deals imaginable, they agree to the 3/5 compromise. Each enslaved person counts as 3/5 of a person. You don't know whether to cry, scream, or just walk out. Later, in a quiet corner, you overhear someone mutter, "We'll pay for this compromise someday." You wish you could tell them. You do, and dearly. Still, the work goes on. You help hand out quill pens, fetch water, pass messages. Sometimes you just listen. The buzz of language and law, the weight of ideas in the air. It's exhausting but electric. One delegate proposes a lifetime president. The room groans. Someone else suggests the people should directly elect everything, even dog catchers. That also doesn't go far. What emerges is a government built on tension, branches designed to keep each other in check, like roommates who don't entirely trust each other with rent money. You scribble notes as terms like electoral college, and checks and balances are floated, poked, and carved into permanence. It's messy, it's flawed, but it's happening. What's quirky is how secretive it all is. Doors are shut, windows nailed, guards posted. You joke that they're trying to birth democracy in a locked basement with no snacks. But the secrecy works. Nobody's grandstanding for newspapers, they're actually trying. By the end of the summer, the Constitution is finished. You watch the final signing. Washington steps forward, solemn as ever. Franklin makes a joke about the sun carved into the back of his chair, says he wasn't sure if it was rising or setting. Now he thinks it's rising. You want to believe. But not everyone's convinced. Some refuse to sign, some storm out. You feel the cracks before the ink is even dry. And here's the twist. The Constitution still isn't law, not until 9 states ratify it. So now the real fight begins. In pamphlets, town halls, and public debates, you wander between gatherings where ordinary people argue about federalism like it's a barn dance gone sideways. In one tavern, a blacksmith yells, "It gives too much power to the central government." In another, a teacher whispers, "Without it, we'll eat ourselves alive." Both may be right. You read the Federalist Papers, a flurry of essays by Hamilton, Madison, and Jay, trying to convince everyone this new system won't lead to tyranny. You're impressed, a little confused, also slightly suspicious of how fast Hamilton writes. At the same time, anti-federalists like George Mason and Patrick Henry voice deep fears. Where are the guaranteed rights, the protections for individuals? You nod. Because honestly, you don't want to swap one distant tyrant for a closer one with better stationery. Eventually, a compromise again. They promise to add a Bill of Rights. That tips the scales. Slowly, the states begin to ratify. You're there in a candlelit room when the 9th state, New Hampshire, votes yes. Someone cheers. Someone else weeps. You quietly exhale. The Constitution is now the supreme law of the land. By 1789, Washington becomes the first president unanimously elected. You see him ride into New York, the crowd pressed so tight you can barely breathe. He bows, solemn and uncomfortable. You swear you hear him mutter, "Here we go." And just like that, a republic is born. Not perfect, not finished, but alive. You stand at the edge of the crowd, watching this unlikely experiment take its first real steps. Not as a soldier, not as a rebel, but as a citizen. And suddenly, that feels even braver. You stand shoulder to shoulder with a sweaty, sunburned crowd, your back sticking to the rough wooden wall of a makeshift meeting hall. The summer air is thick and still, and the only breeze comes from an open window that barely keeps the parchment from curling in your hand. Outside, flies buzz, and distant hammering echoes from nearby scaffolding. Just another sign that this country is still very much under construction. Inside, tempers flare. Voices crack like musket shots, and the scent of ink, body odor, and desperation clings to the rafters. You're part of something new and uneasy, drafting the rules for a country that just won a war, but might lose the peace. It's 1787, and the Articles of Confederation, the rickety skeleton holding these rebellious states together, are buckling under their own weight. The revolution may be over, but the chaos? Oh, that's just getting started. Everywhere you look, people disagree. Should there be a strong central government or power to the states? One chamber of Congress or two? Slavery or no slavery? You glance over at a delegate who's loudly insisting that a president with too much power will just become another king. Someone else mutters that without a firm hand, the whole thing will fall apart like a dropped apple pie. This new world is still bruised from battle, and you feel the anxiety prickling under your skin. You helped throw off a tyrant. Now what? You certainly don't want to invent a newer, shinier one. The meetings are long, sweaty, and peppered with snide jokes and thunderous monologues. Benjamin Franklin, ancient and wheezing, still manages to toss in the occasional zinger that makes half the hall laugh and the other half consider early retirement. Outside, regular folks are getting impatient. Farmers and merchants want debts paid, land surveyed, and prices stable. But in here, debates rage over commas and clauses. You scratch your head, literally and figuratively, as you try to balance your distrust of centralized authority with your very real fear that without it, this young republic might implode before it even holds its first proper election. Historians still argue whether this constitutional convention was a noble balancing act of compromise or a backstage deal by elite landowners to protect their wealth and status. And you're just trying to keep your eyes open through another 3-hour debate over how many votes each state should get. Large states want more. Small states want equality. It's a mess, and you can't help but imagine a toddler throwing blocks while grown-ups bicker in the background. But slowly, painfully, a framework begins to form. James Madison, that quiet, ferret-looking guy in the corner, starts stitching ideas together into a blueprint. Checks and balances, 3 branches of government, a Bill of Rights tacked on as a compromise to get the Constitution passed at all. You hear whispers of federalism, though nobody seems entirely sure what it means. Sounds smart, though. As night falls, lanterns glow against parchment and tired eyes. There's talk of ratification, of sending the finished document to the states like a bottle tossed into a stormy ocean. Will they accept it? Tear it apart? Send it back with coffee stains and curse words scribbled in the margins? Even among your own group, the reactions vary. Some cheer, others grumble. One delegate straight up leaves without signing it. No thank we. You, he says. This smells too much like monarchy with a fake mustache. Still, 39 men do sign, hoping, praying it'll be enough. Out in the streets, news spreads. You stroll through a market where debates break out over barrels of apples and loaves of bread. Some citizens shout, "This Constitution is a masterpiece." Others hiss, "It gives the government too much power." And one guy just yells, "Where's my back pay?" before hurling a cabbage at a tax collector. At night, you sit under a low ceiling, sipping something strong, your hands black with newsprint from the Federalist Papers. Hamilton, Madison, and Jay are out there furiously, defending the new Constitution in print like over-caffeinated debate club champions. You admit it's impressive, dense, yes, but persuasive, like being talked at by someone who knows more about ancient Rome than is probably healthy. The Constitution is eventually ratified, barely. It scrapes through by the skin of its parchment. Teeth in states like New York and Virginia. In some places, promises of a future Bill of Rights make the difference. In others, sheer exhaustion does. You sigh. Somehow, some way, the United States of America has survived its first existential crisis. For now. Of course, not everyone's thrilled. Women, enslaved people, and native nations weren't invited to the party, or even asked what kind of punch they might prefer. Their futures are decided in a room they weren't allowed to enter. You feel the weight of that as you pass a woman reading a pamphlet outside. Her eyes narrow at the words, her mouth tight. You wonder what kind of constitution she would have, written, and yet, there's also a flicker of pride, a nervous, lopsided pride, like trying out your first pair of homemade shoes. They might rub in the wrong places, sure, but they could just carry you somewhere new. You walk through a square where a bell rings faintly in the distance. Lanterns sway. A man is already selling Constitution-themed buttons. Someone else is sketching George Washington's profile onto a coin. America is, once again, reinventing itself. One clause, one argument, one stubborn compromise at a time. And tomorrow, the real test begins. Governing is hard. Governing a free people who mostly hate being told what to do, that's a nightmare in a powdered wig. You lean against a warped wooden fence watching the last of the soldiers drift back home. Their coats are frayed, their boots mismatched, and their eyes, well, they carry the weight of a war that changed the world, but didn't quite pay the bills. The revolution is over, but for many who fought, the promised rewards feel like fairy tales told by well-dressed men in powdered wigs. Some men limp through the gates of sleepy towns to warm welcomes. Others find their farms overgrown, their families scattered, or their debts piled high like winter cordwood. You march beside them, one of thousands who gave years to the cause, only to return to a world that moved on without asking what came next. In theory, there were promises. Land grants, pay, pensions. In reality, most got a pat on the back and an IOU that might as well have been written on a napkin. You remember one poor guy, toothless and sunburnt, holding a faded certificate that said he'd get compensation at a later date. That later never really came. Instead, he sold it to a smooth-talking speculator for a few pennies just to buy bread. And it wasn't just veterans. Widows of fallen soldiers waited years, sometimes forever, for the pensions Congress had, vaguely assured. You see them in taverns and churches clutching letters, their expressions part heartbreak, part fury. One woman, whose husband died at Saratoga, now scrubs laundry for the same men who dined with generals. The lucky few who do get land often find it's miles away. Rocky, unclaimed frontier stuff crawling with mosquitoes and resentment. Sometimes it's land already inhabited by native tribes, reigniting a cycle of violence that no treaty can paper over. You help clear brush on one of these plots, swatting flies, squinting into the dense green, wondering if this is freedom or exile. Tensions rise. Congress, still running on the fumes of wartime credit, can't collect taxes effectively under the Articles of Confederation. States are supposed to chip in funds voluntarily, and surprise, they don't. The national treasury looks more like a child's piggy bank after an ice cream binge. So the government starts printing money. A lot of it. And fast. Inflation balloons like a party trick gone wrong. You walk into a store one day and discover the price of shoes has doubled overnight. Paper currency, already viewed with suspicion, is now the butt of every joke. One newspaper cartoon shows a man wallpapering his outhouse with continental dollars. It's not far from the truth. Meanwhile, veterans begin to organize, some formally, others not so much. You attend a rowdy tavern meeting where the talk turns angry. "We fought for liberty," one man growls, "and now we're being taxed and tossed aside like used bandages." Another slams a mug down. "No pay, no land, no justice. Was the king really worse than this?" There's muttering about marching on state capitals, about demanding what's owed. Some even whisper about a second revolution, this time against the very government they helped birth. You leave with a sick feeling in your stomach and a sense that the war's ghosts aren't quite done haunting. One episode you can't forget takes place in 1783 in Newburgh, New York. Officers of the Continental Army, frustrated by the lack of pay, start planning what amounts to a potential military coup. They think about using force to pressure Congress. You sit stiffly as General George Washington walks into the meeting, unusually quiet. He pauses, pulls out a letter, fumbles with his spectacles and mutters, "Gentlemen, you must pardon me, for I have not only grown gray but almost blind in the service of my country." Silence falls. That one moment, those few unscripted words, diffuses the whole thing. A rebellion that might have shattered the fragile new Union is dissolved by an awkward pause and a glimpse of a weary leader's humanity. Later, people call it the Newburgh conspiracy, and historians still argue whether it was a real threat or just a dramatic misunderstanding. But you were there. You felt the tension. It was very real. Meanwhile, in the countryside, more and more soldiers turn to subsistence living, bartering goods, scraping by. Some head west looking for new starts in Ohio or Kentucky. You join a wagon train once, and by the second week, everyone's sunburned, bitten, and sick of dried beans. Still, it beats starving in Boston or being mocked by the merchants who profited from the war. You start to notice a pattern. Those who were already wealthy, especially merchants, land speculators, and certain officers, often come out of the war richer. Those who carried muskets, built fortifications, and shivered through winters, not so much. The freedom dividend seems oddly selective. A quirky side note, some veterans actually try starting their own settlement. There's one bizarre case of a group planning to create a soldier's utopia in the Mississippi Valley. They draft rules, design a flag, and talk about equality. The whole thing collapses within a year, mostly due to bad planning and worse weather. But for a moment they believed. You cross paths with a man who fought at Trenton, who now makes chairs and sells "I was there" tokens at local fairs. He laughs when you ask if he regrets it. "Nope," he says, "but I do wish I'd asked for payment in cattle." By the end of this chapter, you've learned something uncomfortable. Revolutions don't end when the last cannon falls silent. They seep into the everyday, into broken promises, forgotten names, and quiet bitterness. Some veterans become lawmakers. Others drift into poverty. A few just vanish like smoke off a spent musket. And you? You keep walking. Through towns that barely remember your name, across lands that still bear scars, toward a future that demands more than just bravery. It needs memory and the courage to ask, was this freedom or just a change of management? You settle onto a rough wooden bench in the corner of a noisy tavern, your mug sweating beside you, the room pulsing with arguments. Tankards clink, voices rise, and if you didn't know better, you'd think the war had never ended. But this isn't about redcoats anymore. It's state versus state, farmer versus merchant, coast versus frontier. You're in the fragile years after the revolution, and the union you fought for. It's starting to crack like a poorly fired pot. Everywhere you turn, someone's angry. New York is bickering with New Jersey over trade. Georgia is quietly cutting land deals like it's still 1765. Rhode Island, printing its own money like a toddler in charge of a monopoly bank. You shake your head as you pass a bulletin board plastered with local currencies, each from a different state, each with a wildly different value. You've seen old cabbages with more reliable worth. The Articles of Confederation, the rough draft of America's government, gave each state too much independence and the national government too little spine. Congress can't collect taxes. It can't enforce laws. It can't even guarantee mail delivery without someone stealing the horses. It's like a league of 13 argumentative cousins, and no one wants to be the responsible adult. You attend a local court session in Massachusetts, where angry farmers show up demanding relief from crushing debts. They fought for freedom. But now their land is being seized because they can't pay taxes. Taxes that feel eerily like the ones they rebelled against in the first place. One man mutters, "We just traded King George for King Greedy." It gets a laugh, but not a happy one. Frustration is everywhere. You read broadsides calling for everything from debt relief to a new convention to rewrite the articles altogether. Some even whisper that maybe a monarchy wasn't so bad after all. That part makes you choke on your cider. A merchant in Philadelphia tells you the entire economy is like a spinning top with a bent tip, wobbling wild and doomed to fall. It's colorful, but not wrong. Without a common currency or trade policy, states impose tariffs on each other like rival kingdoms. You walk across a state border and suddenly find your goods taxed or your currency worthless. It's like going on vacation and discovering your money's no good at home. Even worse, European powers are watching and smirking. Britain still has forts in the Northwest Territory, basically daring the U.S. to stop them. Spain controls the Mississippi River and closes it to American trade, choking off Western farmers. You stand at the muddy edge of the river once, watching angry settlers shout into the void. They can't ship their crops east, and now they can't float them south either. One man spits, "What did we even win?" Inside government halls, the squabbling continues. Delegates shout about state sovereignty, about who gets to print money or control waterways. It's exhausting. You watch one representative nearly fall asleep during a debate about boundary lines. Another insists loudly that if this keeps up, he's moving to Canada. Historians still argue whether this era, the so-called Confederation period, was doomed from the start or just badly managed. Some say it was necessary growing pains. Others call it a national identity crisis in powdered wigs. Either way, you feel the anxiety of a dream threatening to rot from the inside out. Still, not all is chaos. There are moments of progress, like the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. You remember standing on a grassy knoll, watching surveyors map out the future of new territories like Ohio and Indiana. It's orderly, fair, at least on paper. No slavery allowed there, and a clear path for new states to join the Union. It's a rare win, and it gives you hope, even if you're swatting mosquitoes the whole time. But even that glimmer is shadowed by who's missing from the plan. Native nations, already reeling from years of war, find their lands being measured and marked without consent. You attend a tense meeting between U.S. officials and tribal leaders who demand answers. The officials nod, smile, and offer handshakes. But the maps in their saddlebags tell a different story, and so the fractures deepen. You pass a field where local militia drills just in case. You hear rumors of border skirmishes between settlers and state patrols. Some towns even talk about joining foreign nations for protection. You laugh at first until you realize they're serious. There's a story, possibly apocryphal, of a Massachusetts farmer who nailed a note to a tree reading, "If this be liberty, then may the devil have my plow." You find that tree years later, no note, but the bark still bears the scar of the nail. It makes you shiver just a bit. One night as the sky darkens over the Blue Ridge, you sit by a campfire with a group of veterans turned settlers. They swap stories about the war, about Congress, about their thinning patience. One of them, missing. 2 fingers and most of his teeth, says, "We won the war but lost the peace." You nod. There's a long silence after that, just crickets and the occasional crackle of firewood, and yet under the bickering and bitterness, something else stirs. A quiet recognition that the country cannot go on like this, that maybe, just maybe, it's time to gather again, this time not to fight a king but to save what was born in the fight against him. You leave the tavern the next morning, the sun burning away the mist, and the first whispers of a new convention on your lips. It's going to take compromise, sacrifice, possibly more arguments about commas. But for the first time in a while, you feel something faint flickering beneath the frustration. Possibility. You feel it in the soles of your feet as you tramp down the rutted dirt road. Something is going to snap. The town commons are full of whispers and clenched fists. Out here in western Massachusetts, you don't need a newspaper to tell you folks are angry. You can read it in their faces, in the padlocks bolted onto courthouse doors, in the muskets being cleaned at kitchen tables. This is more than grumbling. This is Shays' rebellion rising like a thunderhead over the hills. It starts, as most revolts do, with debt. Veterans and farmers alike are being crushed by high taxes and court fees. You walk past foreclosed farms, families huddled on the porches of what used to be their homes. These men fought for liberty, only to find themselves chained to debts. They can't pay in a currency no one trusts. Some states had offered debt relief. Massachusetts doubled down instead, demanding payments in gold and silver, which of course nobody in the western counties had. You meet Daniel Shays in a smoky barn, where a crowd has gathered to decide what to do next. Shays is a former Continental Army captain, not particularly loud or flashy, but steady, the kind of man who fought battles without needing a drum roll. He listens more than he speaks, but when he does speak, you hear the fire beneath his calm. "We're not lawless," he says, "but the laws ain't for us anymore." That barn meeting turns into many, and then into marches. Hundreds of men take up arms and head for the courthouses, not to burn them down, but to shut them down. No court, no foreclosures. It's simple math. You trudge alongside them in the cold, boots squelching in frozen mud, wondering if you're witnessing a protest or the rebirth of civil war. The state government in Boston, full of wealthy merchants and eastern elites, panics. They call the rebels insurgents, anarchists, ungrateful scum. But what really stings, they accuse them of being just like the British rebels once claimed to hate. You overhear one judge sneer, "How quickly revolution eats its own." Since Congress can't raise a national army, thanks Articles of Confederation, Massachusetts raises a private one, funded by Eastern businessmen, armed to the teeth, and given a mandate to end the uprising. You see them march out with polished muskets and polished boots, a striking contrast to the ragtag rebels in patched coats. The clash comes in January 1787. You crouch behind a tree as gunfire echoes through the snowy fields outside Springfield, where Shays and his men had tried to seize a federal arsenal. The rebellion unravels fast. Some are killed, most scatter. Shays flees to Vermont. No grand finale, no dramatic last stand, just hunger, fear, and a slow dissolve into disappointment. And yet, what follows sends bigger shockwaves than any musket volley. You walk the streets in the days after, hearing people mutter things like, "There but for grace," or "I can't blame them." The rebellion might have failed militarily, but politically, it jolts the country awake. Suddenly, elites in every state are afraid. If Massachusetts, home of John Adams and high-minded revolution, can nearly implode, what about Virginia? Or Pennsylvania? What if the whole thing comes crashing down, not from outside enemies, but from within? You attend a dinner party in Philadelphia, where politicians speak in hushed tones. One whispers that Shays' rebellion was a warning shot across our collective bow. Another calls it the final straw for the Articles. These weren't just disgruntled farmers, they argue. They were a symptom of a government too weak to keep order or protect property. Property, of course, being the sacred cow of 18th century politics. And so, within months, a call goes out. Delegates from all the states, well, all but Rhode Island, which decides to sit this one out, presumably on principle and spite, are to meet in Philadelphia and fix the Articles of Confederation. Or, if we're being honest, burn them down and start over. You find yourself once again trudging toward a gathering of revolutionaries, but this time there are no muskets, no powder kegs, just parchment, ink, and a mountain of distrust. Along the way you pass taverns where Shays is either called a villain or a hero. Historians still argue whether he was a radical threat to democracy or its reluctant savior. Some say he exposed how fragile liberty really was. Others say he endangered the very freedom he claimed to defend. Either way, his rebellion punches a hole clean through the illusion that the revolution had settled anything. A quirky footnote. One of the rebellion's lesser-known leaders ends up fleeing all the way to Canada, where he opens a tavern and names it the Broken Gavel. According to travelers, the cider's terrible, but the conversation is always lively. As you walk, you see more people talking about unity, not the fluffy kind from war posters, but real, difficult, compromise-heavy unity. A stronger national government, a better balance between freedom and order, maybe even, gasp, a president. You arrive in Philadelphia just as the summer of 1787 is heating up. Horses sweat in the cobbled streets, wigs are powdered to absurd, degrees, and the city buzzes with anticipation. The men gathering here? Some are heroes of the revolution, others are bankers, lawyers, philosophers. All of them are nervous, because they know what they build here could collapse just as easily as what came before. You pause outside Independence Hall, the same building where the Declaration was born. You look at the cracked bricks, the faded shutters, and wonder if this place has another miracle in it. If the ideas of a new constitution can hold a nation that's still figuring out what it means to be free. For now, you sit on a barrel in the shade, the ghosts of rebellion still trailing. Your boots. The war is over. The peace has faltered. But maybe, just maybe, something stronger is about to rise from the ashes. You shift uncomfortably on a rickety bench, sweat sliding down your neck as the heavy summer air of Philadelphia clings to your skin like a second shirt. It's May of 1787 and you're back inside the stuffy, echoing walls of Independence Hall, where revolution once took its first breath. Now, almost a decade later, you're here again to witness something arguably just as bold, the attempt to reinvent the entire American government. You glance around the room. George Washington sits silently at the head of the chamber, looking like a marble statue freshly dusted. He's already been chosen to preside because, well, who's going to say no to George Washington? Benjamin Franklin's lounging under a window looking every bit like a wise old tortoise in a wig, while younger delegates like James Madison scribble furiously, their eyes flicking between ideas and egos. They weren't supposed to do this technically. The original plan was to revise the Articles of Confederation, to give the weak federal government a few extra teeth. But almost immediately, someone says what they're all thinking. This old framework isn't fixable. It needs to be scrapped. Quietly, nervously, they agree. And with that, you watch them plunge into the chaos of creating something entirely new. James Madison steps into the spotlight early, presenting what becomes known as the Virginia Plan. It's bold, ambitious, and would give more power to larger states. Smaller states freak out. Enter the New Jersey Plan, which counters with equal representation for all states, big or small. What follows is 3 months of caffeine-free cage fighting in powdered wigs. You sit through debates about executive power, about bicameral legislatures, about how much power to give the federal government without becoming a monarchy in disguise. One day they're all smiles. The next day someone's storming out. Literally. At one point, tempers get so high that a few delegates pack their bags and leave town in a huff. And slavery, oh, slavery. You hear it whispered in corners and argued behind closed doors. Some delegates want it abolished. Others insist the Southern economy depends on it. After endless hand-wringing, they strike an ugly compromise. Slaves will count as 3/5 of a person for representation and taxation. You can feel the weight of that decision in the pit of your stomach. It's the kind of compromise that buys unity now by borrowing trouble from the future. The debates go on. Should there be a single executive or a group of them? How should the president be chosen? You watch the concept of the Electoral College take shape like a strange, lopsided machine no one quite understands. But it's better than leaving it to pure popular vote, they say. Maybe. And somewhere between the debates about coinage and impeachment and post roads, something remarkable starts to emerge. A structure. A skeleton. A new kind of government. Federal, flexible, and, in theory, fair. You see it take shape clause by clause. An executive branch, a legislative branch, a judiciary, checks and balances, enumerated powers, a preamble that starts with "we the people," even though, let's be honest, not all the people get a real voice yet. You sneak peeks at Madison's notebook, filled with outlines, flowcharts, and the occasional coffee stain. He's obsessed with making this thing work. Franklin, in contrast, seems to be holding the room together with grandfatherly charm and occasional zingers. He famously says, "I confess that I do not entirely approve of this Constitution, but I doubt whether any other convention we can obtain may be able to make a better one." In other words, it's not perfect, but it's good enough, and that's something. Historians still argue whether the Constitution was truly democratic or just a clever consolidation of elite power. Some say it was a visionary leap forward. Others call it a patchwork of compromises built to placate rich landowners. You sit on your bench wondering if both can be true. One particularly muggy afternoon, you find yourself staring at the closed windows. They're nailed shut to keep eavesdroppers out. The secrecy is real. The stakes are enormous. Outside, the public has no idea what's going on. Inside, the delegates are practically melting in their breeches. And then, on September 17th, it's done. You watch as 39 delegates sign the final document, some with grand flourishes, others like they're swallowing bad medicine. Washington stands tall, solemn. Franklin smiles gently. And you? You feel the strange electricity of witnessing, something monumental that somehow still feels incomplete. As the delegates leave the hall, a curious woman named Elizabeth Willing Powell stops Franklin and asks, "Well, Doctor, what have we got? A republic or a monarchy?" Franklin doesn't miss a beat. "A republic," he says. "If you can keep it." That line hits you like a thunderclap, because it's not just about what they've written, it's about what you, the people, will do next. Will this Constitution hold? Will future generations preserve it? Or will it unravel under the same tensions that broke the Articles? You attend state ratifying conventions next, each one a new battleground. Some states embrace the Constitution quickly, others balk, demanding a Bill of Rights. You listen to fiery speeches in smoky rooms, the air thick with fear and hope. Alexander. Hamilton writes essay after essay the Federalist Papers, trying to win over skeptics. Opponents, the anti-federalists, fire back with warnings of tyranny and federal overreach. Eventually, enough states say yes. By June 1788, the Constitution is officially ratified. Not everyone is happy, but the deed is done. You feel the mood shift across the country, like a collective exhale after holding your breath for far too long. There's one final irony that tickles you. The document, written in secret, in sweaty silence, becomes the cornerstone of a nation that prides itself on openness and free speech. Go figure. So here you are, standing again at the edge of a new beginning. The war for independence is long past, but the struggle to define that independence has just begun. And what comes next? Elections, inaugurations, cabinets, scandals, amendments. It'll all unfold like a drama no playwright could have dreamed. But tonight you simply walk out of Independence Hall, the evening air cooler now, the stars sharp above you. You look back once, then turn toward the future, step by uncertain step. You sit with quiet reverence in the council house, where smoke from the central fire coils toward the roof like a spirit seeking escape. Outside, the land stretches in all directions: forests, rivers, hunting grounds your ancestors have known for centuries. But today, something feels off. You sense it in the tension between the elders, in the uneasy glances cast toward the horizon. The war between the British and the Americans might be nearing its end, but for native nations like yours, the end has no promises, only uncertainty. You listen as a speaker, draped in traditional robes adorned with beads and feathers, recounts the treaties, the battles, the shifting alliances. The American Revolution may have been a war for independence, but for your people, it has been a war of survival. Siding with the British once seemed like a logical choice. They promised to protect your lands from encroaching settlers, to respect your sovereignty. But now, as the British retreat, what becomes of those promises? Some of your people fought, bravely alongside redcoats, standing shoulder to shoulder in ambushes and skirmishes. Others tried to remain neutral, hoping the war would pass like a thunderstorm in summer, loud and dangerous but temporary. A few even joined the patriot cause, seduced by the rhetoric of freedom, or simply in opposition to traditional enemies. Now, with the colonies emerging as the victors, the question of who truly won and who lost becomes painfully clear. Historians still argue whether Native American nations had viable alternatives during the war. Could neutrality have protected your people? Could a stronger alliance between tribes have turned the tide? Or were you trapped in a struggle not of your making, forced to choose between two colonial powers that both saw your lands as spoils? Of war? You remember the Mohawk war leader Joseph Brant, who tried to unite the Iroquois Confederacy behind the British. His vision was bold, his arguments persuasive. You might have walked with him once, listening to his voice echo through the woods as he spoke of defending your people's way of life. But even Brant, for all his cunning and charisma, couldn't hold back the tides. The Iroquois League itself, fractured, some nations siding with Britain, others with the Americans, brothers split by foreign loyalties. The Confederacy, which had stood for centuries, cracked under the strain. Now, with British troops withdrawing and patriot settlers pushing, westward you walk your ancestral trails and wonder what remains truly yours. You step over broken branches and bullet casings, traces of battles fought in your forests. The treaties signed in faraway rooms don't reflect the smoke-stained tears of your elders, the grief of children orphaned in raids, or the confusion of a young generation growing up with no clear enemy and no certain friend. One quirky truth floats up amid the sadness. Some of the British Indian agents who once brought rifles and gifts now offer hats, dozens of absurd floppy felt hats, handed out like peace offerings. The symbolism isn't lost on you. Where once they brought weapons, now they bring accessories, as if a stylish brim might replace lost land. You shake your head and tuck the hat away, unsure whether to laugh or cry. In whispers you hear news of the Treaty of Paris being signed across the ocean. You're not mentioned in it, not once. The new United States and Great Britain have decided the fate of millions of acres of native land without so much as a consultation. They've traded forests and rivers like poker chips, their maps drawn with straight lines across crooked terrain. You stare at one of these maps, its red and blue borders slashing across your homeland like war paint, and you feel the ground tilt beneath your feet. Still, not all is lost. In the Ohio Valley, resistance simmers. Shawnee, Miami, and Delaware, warriors begin forging alliances to defend their lands from settlers emboldened by victory. You sense the rising storm, another conflict brewing even as the ink dries on the peace treaty. You may not have been invited to the table, but you've never stopped fighting for your place. As you sit under the stars, the fire crackling at your feet, you reflect on how the revolution has reshaped your world. Once you were caught between British red and Patriot blue. Now you face a new enemy, an America that speaks of liberty but marches westward with bayonets and deeds. The irony is thick enough to stir into soup. Still, your people endure. You teach your children the old songs. You gather for ceremonies, for councils, for mourning, and for dance. You plant corn where ashes once lay. You tell the stories, not just of battle and betrayal, but of survival. Because survival, as it turns out, is its own form of revolution. A young child climbs onto your lap, looking up with wide, curious eyes. "Will we be okay?" they ask. You don't have an answer. Not really. But you hold them close, brush the ash from their cheek, and whisper the truth that runs deeper than any treaty. We're still here. You're in London now, curled on a windowsill with rain streaking the glass and the bitter scent of tea clinging to your sleeves. The war is over, officially. The colonies, you still hesitate to call them the United States, have won. And here, across the Atlantic, Britain is licking its wounds with all the pomp and denial of a once unstoppable empire now thoroughly humbled. You sip Earl Grey that tastes a bit like regret, and listen to a parliamentary debate that's more theatrical than productive. Whigs blame the Tories. Tories blame the King. Everyone blames General Cornwallis, who seems to be avoiding public appearances these days. You imagine him sulking in a drafty manner, shuffling papers and avoiding eye contact with the gardener. Outside, Londoners pass under umbrellas, half of them talking about the weather, and the other half grumbling about the colonies. "Those ungrateful rebels," someone mutters near you. It's a sentiment that floats in the air like chimney soot. You hear it in pubs, where old officers boast about battles they didn't win. You see it in pamphlets, inked with titles like "The Folly of Empire" or "Lessons from America," though no one seems particularly eager to learn them. But you also catch whispers of something deeper, more painful. The revolution has stirred uncomfortable questions in the British mind. If 13 ragged colonies could overthrow a monarchy, could others? Ireland, for instance, is watching closely. So is India, though quietly for now. Even working-class Londoners packed into smoky neighborhoods and living on crusts and curses wonder aloud, if freedom means governing ourselves, why don't we get a say? Historians still argue whether the British defeat sparked genuine reform or just bureaucratic reshuffling. Some claim the shock forced Parliament to clean up corruption, streamline the military, and rethink colonial policy. Others say it merely paused the empire's expansion long enough to recalibrate. After all, the sun would still rise on British rule from the Caribbean to Calcutta, for a while anyway. Back in the House of Commons, a fiery backbencher waves a paper and shouts about the cost of the war. Nearly £80 million. And for what? The question echoes. It's not just about money, it's about pride. About losing to farmers in homespun coats, led by a man who famously never told a lie, unless you count his dental history. You stroll past print shops churning out caricatures of King George III, some gently mocking, others downright savage. One shows him tangled in chains labeled arrogance and taxes, his crown slipping off like a badly fitted wig. Another has the colonies represented as unruly teenagers throwing tea and temper tantrums while Father Britannia looks on, in exasperation. Yet the king himself, he stays mostly silent, withdrawn. You hear he walks his palace halls at odd hours, murmuring to paintings and obsessively reading American newspapers. Whether that's true or just a popular rumor, Depends on who you ask. Either way, George III has become something of a ghost. Still king, still powerful, but haunted by what slipped through his fingers. Still, not everyone mourns. British merchants begin reopening trade with the new United States almost immediately. Their ships return to Boston, Charleston, and New York, now laden with cotton, tobacco, and goods that cost slightly less patriotic outrage. The irony is rich. Rebellion cost thousands of lives, yet commerce sails on with barely a hiccup. You visit a dinner party hosted by a banker who's already invested in post-war American debt. There's money to be made in liberty, he jokes, stuffing roast duck into his mouth. Across the table, a naval officer raises a glass and adds, "And we'll take it back someday, on paper, if not in blood." Laughter ripples through the candle-lit room, but it feels thin, like it might crack under too much weight. One quirky bit of gossip catches your attention. Some Londoners have started wearing faux continental fashion as a trend. Homespun coats, tricorn hats, even wooden teeth replicas. It's a bizarre nod to the rebels they claim to disdain. You suspect it's partly mockery, partly envy. After all, the American Revolution gave birth to something romantic, a raw, mythic struggle against tyranny. That's marketing gold. You walk home along the Thames, the river swollen and sullen under a cloudy moon. You think about what Britain really lost. Not just colonies or revenue, or a strategic foothold in North America, but a sense of invincibility. The American Revolution didn't topple the empire, but it cracked its foundation just enough for the rest of the world to see that cracks were possible. A boy sells newspapers on the corner. "Peace with America! King's response inside!" he shouts. You buy one, and read it by lamplight. The King's statement is formal, clipped, carefully diplomatic. He wishes the United States well. You wonder how much of it he means. Back in your flat, you stare out at the city. London endures, of course, it always does. But something has shifted. You feel it in the silence between carriage wheels, in the flickering gas lights, in the hesitant toasts at midnight. A continent away, a new nation is forming. And here, in the old world, the empire begins its long, slow reckoning. You catch the scent of gunpowder and revolution on the wind, but this time, it isn't blowing from Boston or Yorktown. You're in Paris now. Cobblestones underfoot, street, hawkers shouting, aristocrats gliding past in powdered wigs, and the whispers are unmistakable. Liberty is contagious. The American Revolution, barely concluded, has sparked ideas that leap across oceans like lightning striking dry leaves. You duck into a cramped coffee house on the left bank, brushing elbows with students, soldiers, and a few wide-eyed philosophers. The chatter is electric. Rousseau is quoted over burnt espresso. Voltaire's wit echoes in every debate and on every tongue. If the Americans can do it, why can't we? The bartender rolls his eyes. They'll get us all killed, these thinkers. The French had already backed the American cause with ships, soldiers, and lavish coin purses. More to needle the British than out of pure love for liberty. But now the revolution feels less like foreign policy and more like a mirror. People here are hungry. For bread, yes, but also for change. Historians still argue whether the American Revolution directly caused the French Revolution or merely inspired it. Was it a domino or just a particularly loud cheer from the sidelines? Either way, by 1789, France will erupt in flames of its own, and many will point backward, to Philadelphia, to Lexington, to that Declaration of Independence, as if it were a matchbook dropped on dry straw. But it's not just France. You sail next to the Caribbean, where the lush island of Saint-Domingue trembles beneath the weight of something much bigger than sugar plantations. Enslaved men and women have heard tales of liberty, too. Read pamphlets smuggled in barrels, listened to sailors who drank with patriots in Charleston. Their revolution won't be quiet, and it won't ask politely. You feel the ground quake beneath your feet in Haiti, where the Haitian Revolution begins to take shape. A rebellion that will eventually lead to the world's first black republic. A stunning rejection of both colonialism and slavery. You help hide a stolen French musket in a thatched roof, your hands trembling. This is not a revolution with powdered wigs and parchment declarations. This one burns hotter, costs more, and frightens empires into silence. Back in London, you read editorials clutching pearls. "Has America opened Pandora's box?" asks one. The British abolitionist movement gains momentum, fueled in part by the contradiction too glaring to ignore. How could a war for liberty leave millions in chains, in now Spain and Portugal, even in parts of South America, new voices begin to murmur. The American Revolution has become a story, a dangerous one, and like all good stories, it travels. But here's a quirky twist. The French Navy officers who fought in the American War of Independence go home wearing little liberty pins. Not government-issued, not regulation, just stylish little reminders of the dream they helped shape. One admiral, legend says, even had his wig powdered red, white, and blue for a masquerade ball. The American aesthetic is now revolutionary chic. And in German principalities, yes, even the scattered patchwork of the Holy Roman Empire, you find universities debating republicanism. A professor waves a translated copy of the Declaration in one hand and a pretzel in the other. You can't decide which he's more passionate about. Back across the Atlantic in newly minted America, leaders like Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin grin like proud parents, watching other nations flirt with rebellion. Franklin, of course, soaks up attention in Paris like a sponge, sipping wine while whispering radical ideas in salons lit by chandeliers. He's become a kind of Enlightenment rock star, part scientist, part statesman, part gossip columnist. Yet, not all Americans are thrilled. Some worry that all this revolutionary energy might boomerang back. What if oppressed groups in America, enslaved people, indigenous nations, disenfranchised farmers, decide to borrow the very logic that sparked the war? What if liberty for all is taken literally? The irony could curdle milk. A revolution, begun to escape tyranny, may now inspire others to escape you. You feel it in town halls and newspaper columns, an unease, a shifting in seats. The story of the American Revolution is no longer just yours. It's a torch being passed, sometimes to hands you didn't expect. You wander through Amsterdam, where merchants calculate the risks of trade with the new republic. Some take the gamble, others hedge their bets, convinced America won't last. A decade. They'll collapse under their own freedom, one Dutchman says, wagging a pipe at you. You smile. That's the thing about revolutions. Most people never believe they'll work until they already have. As you board another ship, wind ruffling your coat, you glance back at Europe and wonder how many revolutions are now blooming beneath the surface. You've seen the sparks catch, you've smelled the smoke, and you've learned that while bullets and banners may start a war, it's the ideas that outlive it. You close your eyes to the creak of wood and the lap of water, remembering how it all began with a protest over taxes, a tossed crate of tea, and a murmur of disobedience. Funny how small things swell into legend, and legends once told refuse to stay in one place. You step off the creaking planks of a river ferry and onto soil that should feel like home, but something's different. You're on land that once belonged entirely to indigenous nations, and now, after the war, it's a patchwork of promises broken, treaties ignored, and borders redrawn by men with powdered wigs who never set foot here. The revolution is over, yes, but for native nations, the battle never truly ends. You travel west of the Appalachians, where the air feels thicker, like history still clings to the trees. Here, the American victory isn't seen as liberation, it's an invasion. You sit with Shawnee and Cherokee leaders who recount how, during the war, they were urged to pick sides. Some allied with the British, hoping the Redcoats would at least try to slow the settlers. Others tried neutrality. A few even fought alongside the Patriots, betting on the new republic to honor its word. Spoiler, it didn't. Now, with the British gone, nothing stands between the United States and its thirst for land. You walk with a Delaware elder whose village was promised protection by American generals, only to be attacked weeks later by militia seeking vengeance. The logic is dizzying. Many settlers see native resistance not as defense of ancestral lands, but as defiance of their liberty. Historians still argue whether the American Revolution was a turning point for indigenous rights or just a continuation of colonial expansion under new management. Either way, you can't ignore the numbers. Tens of thousands of native people displaced, entire nations splintered, and hunting grounds now fenced off as private property. You pass through Ohio, where a confederation of tribes is forming. This isn't submission, it's strategy. Shawnee, Miami, and others are banding together, ready to resist what they now know is inevitable. The United States, though young and under-resourced, sees these alliances as threats. You attend a tense council where one war chief says, "We fought to keep the British. We will fight harder to stop the Americans." Back in Philadelphia, Congress debates what to do with Indian lands. It's a tidy phrase for a messy reality. Maps are redrawn with strokes of ink that erase entire cultures. A quirky but grim detail? Some land speculators are now investing in parcels they've never seen, already buying and selling acres of Shawnee hunting trails as though they were empty plots in a new suburban dream. And here's a cruel twist. George Washington, hailed as the father of the country, is also a massive landowner pushing westward expansion. His private letters speak of civilizing native peoples, code for assimilation, erasure, or removal. You watch him walk the same halls where freedom was, declared in wonder. Is liberty a circle or just a line drawn around some and not others? You travel south to Creek and Chickasaw territory, where tribal diplomacy becomes a daily dance. Some leaders try to negotiate, sending emissaries to American cities with ceremonial pipes and carefully worded letters. Others dig in. You sit under star-filled skies and hear chants sung not in mourning, but in defiance. In the Carolinas, where the Revolution saw a brutal civil war between patriots and loyalists, native communities have fared no better. Many sided with the British who, while hardly saints, were at least more interested in maintaining stability than pushing settlers westward. Now, with British forces gone, retribution comes fast. You witness burned villages, stolen corn, and treaties annulled before the ink dries. One lesser-known moment catches your attention: the 1784 Treaty of Fort Stanwix. The United States claims it settles land boundaries, but the Iroquois argue the negotiators had no authority to sign. It's like someone sold your house while you were on vacation, and the buyer now demands your front door keys. You walk the edges of what the Americans now call the Northwest Territory. It sounds neat and orderly on paper. In reality, it's contested, bloody, and lawless. Settlers build cabins on land promised to tribes. Tribes retaliate. Militias counter-retaliate. It's a spiral, and you're caught in the dust kicked up by centuries of broken promises. Back east, the mood is mixed. Some Americans argue that the new republic should honor native sovereignty. Others claim the land is unused and ripe for progress. In a Boston newspaper, you read a letter from a minister suggesting that native people could be converted, educated, and made into citizens if they'd just stop resisting. The hubris is staggering. The pattern is familiar. And still, native cultures persist. You sit with a young Mohawk woman who recites oral history older than any American constitution. You watch dances that have survived not just war, but policies meant to extinguish them. You taste corn stew passed down through generations. This, too, is resistance. A quiet moment stays with you. A stone tool found beside a creek held in a pie, boy's hand like a sacred thing. It belonged to someone long before flags, muskets, or declarations. It reminds you that revolutions are not always about fire and speeches. Sometimes they're about survival, about remembering who you are, even when the world insists you forget. As you leave the borderlands behind, the wind carries songs of mourning and strength. You wonder what kind of nation America is becoming, a place for freedom or a place that only remembers certain kinds of stories. You stroll through a quiet modern city, its buildings clean, its flags waving proudly in the breeze. Tourists snap selfies in front of bronze statues. Children clamber over replicas of revolutionary cannons, and the air smells faintly of pretzels in progress. But beneath the polished sidewalks and historical plaques, you can feel it, the pulse of something, older, deeper. The American Revolution didn't just end, it evolved. You step into a museum where fragments of the past whisper from behind glass: a faded uniform, a rusted musket, a letter written in looping script that still smells faintly of tobacco and ink. Each relic tells a different story, one of glory, one of fear, one of contradiction. You listen to school kids recite lines about freedom and heroes, and you smile, but also wince, because revolutions are messy and myths are tidy. You exit the EU museum and walk through a public square named for a founding father. His name is on buildings, textbooks, even money. But there's a protest happening just across the street. Young people holding signs, chanting words about justice, equity, voices left out. You recognize the echo. This too is revolutionary, because the American Revolution never really ended. It just changed shape. What started with muskets and powdered wigs now stirs in classrooms, courtrooms, social media threads, and street marches. The language of liberty: all men are created equal. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness still burns hot. But now, more than ever, people ask, who gets to be included in that all? You wander into a library, shelves heavy with interpretations of the revolution. Historians still argue whether the revolution was radical or reserved, whether it empowered the masses or merely shifted power from one elite to another. You flip through books with titles like The Incomplete Revolution and Liberty's Hypocrisy. Some call the founders visionaries, others call them hypocrites. And honestly, they might all be right. A quirky tidbit: in the 1970s, a campaign tried to get Samuel Adams rebranded as the original American rebel for a beer label. You sip the result at a local pub later that day. It's not bad. The bartender chuckles. Nothing says liberty like barley and branding. Outside, the city bustles. Street art quotes Frederick Douglass and Abigail Adams, graffiti and murals, coexisting with plaques and granite. You pass a high school named for Crispus Attucks, the black sailor who was among the first to die in the Boston Massacre. Students pour out onto the sidewalk, laughing, scrolling, living history without even realizing it. And still, the debates go on. Is protest patriotic or problematic? Should statues stay or be replaced? What would the founders think of democracy today with its tweets, think pieces, and 24-hour news cycles? You imagine Thomas Jefferson arguing on a podcast and Benjamin Franklin joining a subreddit. Chaos and yet somehow perfect. Modern revolutions are quieter, but no less bold. They come through voting booths, viral videos, community organizing, whistleblowers, and weekend marches with cardboard signs and clever hashtags. The tools have changed. The spark has not. You think about the phrase, a more perfect union. Not perfect, more perfect. Always striving, always unfinished. You see that idea reflected in people. Immigrants chasing opportunity. Activists demanding justice. Teachers building young minds. Veterans searching for meaning after war. In this reimagined revolution, liberty doesn't just mean independence from kings. It means autonomy, dignity, voice. It means confronting the past honestly and choosing deliberately what kind of country to be next. It means owning up to the cracks in the foundation and still finding a way to build something beautiful. You step into a quiet park at dusk. Fireflies blink in the shadows. Somewhere nearby, an old man is telling his grandchild how George Washington crossed the Delaware. The child listens with wide eyes and interrupts. Did his boat have Wi-Fi? You laugh softly. History is always being rewritten, reinterpreted, rediscovered. That's the point. And maybe, just maybe, the real legacy of the American Revolution is this: not perfection, but possibility. A country founded on ideals it never fully lived up to, but keeps trying to reach, one generation at a time. As the stars appear above, you lie back on the grass and exhale. You've marched with armies, crossed icy rivers, sat in smoky taverns, whispered messages in invisible ink, and stood in the chambers where nations were born. And now it's time to rest. The night settles in deeper now, like a soft wool blanket draped across your shoulders. The distant noise of crowds, cannons, and clamoring debates fades into a gentle hush. Just the whisper of wind in the trees, and the slow rhythm of your breath. You've wandered far tonight, from the cobbled streets of colonial Boston to the echoing silence of post-war treaties, from smoke-filled battles to parchment-signed dreams, and through it all, you've felt the pulse of revolution, urgent, flawed, brave, defiant, and deeply human. Let it fade now. Let the drums of history quiet down to a low, steady thump, like a heartbeat carrying you gently into stillness. The voices of founders, fighters, farmers, and dreamers all settle into silence, like pages of a well-worn book gently closing. You are not in a battlefield anymore. You are here, in this quiet room, wrapped in blankets, held by the soft safety of now. The past can rest, and so can you. Outside, perhaps, a light rain begins to fall, or maybe it's just the hum of the fan, steady and soothing like distant thunder. Let your mind drift freely now. You've done enough thinking, enough remembering, enough marching through time. The revolution will still be here in the morning. For now, there's nothing you need to solve, defend, or decide. Just breathe. The journey is complete. Sweet dreams.